Section 1. The Medical Conspiracy of Springfield General. There is a hospital in Springfield. You have probably seen it dozens of times across hundreds of episodes. Springfield General Hospital. It sits somewhere in the middle of town, between the elementary school and the power plant, and it shows up whenever the plot needs someone to be ill, injured, or dangerously close to a revelation the show isn't ready to make yet. It looks like a normal hospital. It has corridors and gurneys and nurses and pale scrubs and doctors with clipboards. It has waiting rooms with uncomfortable chairs and vending machines that dispense things you shouldn't eat during a health crisis. It has, on the surface, every single feature that would make a reasonable person look at it and think, yes, that is a place where sick people go to get better. But here's the thing about Springfield General that nobody really sits with long enough to notice. The hospital almost never makes anyone better. It receives patients, it monitors them, it runs tests, issues diagnoses, and occasionally performs surgery with the casual disregard of a staff that seems deeply unbothered by outcomes. And then those patients either recover on their own, get worse for plot reasons, or walk out of the building exactly as damaged as they walked in, just now with a large unexplained medical bill attached to their name. Think about the times Homer has been admitted to Springfield General. The number is almost impossible to count with any precision. He has been brought in after car accidents, industrial accidents, self-inflicted injuries of extraordinary creativity, spontaneous cardiac events, and at least one incident involving a vending machine that we will circle back to because it matters a great deal. And in the vast majority of those visits, the treatment he receives ranges from borderline incompetent to openly baffling. There was the time a doctor announced Homer had every disease known to medical science simultaneously and concluded that this made him functionally indestructible through something called Three Stooges syndrome. This was presented as a diagnosis. A real medical professional, employed by a real hospital, looked at a patient and told him that the diseases inside his body were so numerous and so evenly matched that they were canceling each other out in a kind of biological gridlock. The doctor was not alarmed. Homer was not alarmed. The scene was played for laughs and the show moved on. But what kind of hospital employs a doctor capable of saying something like that with a straight face and then just letting the patient walk out the door? What quality of medical institution looks at a man riddled with every illness simultaneously and decides that the appropriate course of action is to shrug and send him home? The answer the show never provides is that Springfield General may not be operating as a traditional hospital at all. Let us slow down and think about what the hospital actually does consistently, across many seasons, in a pattern that holds together far better than any single episode makes it look. Springfield General consistently admits patients. It consistently runs tests. It consistently produces diagnoses. And it consistently fails to produce cures in any meaningful long-term sense, except in cases where the cure would inconveniently complicate the plot, at which point it produces cures with suspicious efficiency. The hospital exists in a state of perpetual medical limbo, a facility that processes illness without resolving it, that catalogs suffering without eliminating it, that keeps its patients suspended in a monitored state of ongoing dysfunction. That sounds, if you allow yourself to follow the thought, like a hospital that is not particularly interested in getting people healthy. It sounds like a hospital that is interested in something else entirely. Here is where the theory begins to take shape. Springfield General is funded almost entirely by municipal contracts and employer healthcare programs. The largest employer in Springfield, by a significant margin, is the nuclear power plant. The nuclear power plant is owned by Charles Montgomery Burns. Burns, as we have established across the fabric of the show's entire run, is a man with more reasons than most to keep Springfield's population in a state of manageable illness rather than robust health. A healthy population asks questions. A healthy population has the energy to organize, to protest, to investigate. A population that is perpetually cycling in and out of a hospital, never quite sick enough to die and never quite well enough to function at full capacity, is a population that is occupied, busy, distracted by its own symptoms. This is not the theory that the show presents to you. The show presents Springfield General as a background element, a familiar location that appears when the story needs medical atmosphere. But the pattern of what the hospital does and does not accomplish across the series tells a story that the individual episodes never quite assemble into a complete picture. Consider Dr. Nick Riviera. If you have spent any time with The Simpsons, you know Dr. Nick. He is the physician who greets his patients with a cheerful wave and a hello that implies he may not entirely remember who he is or what his qualifications are. He performs surgeries with instruments of questionable medical legitimacy. He issues prescriptions with the casual enthusiasm of someone handing out candy. He is, by the standards of any licensing board on Earth, a catastrophe. And yet he practices medicine in Springfield without interruption across the full run of the series. Nobody investigates him. Nobody revokes his license. Nobody sits in a regulatory boardroom and asks the obvious question of how a physician this obviously underqualified has been allowed to continue operating on the citizens of a medium-sized American town for decades without consequence. The answer that the show implies through its own comedic logic is that Springfield simply does not regulate its medical professionals. The answer that the conspiracy reading suggests is something slightly different. Dr. Nick practices without interference not because Springfield lacks oversight, but because Dr. Nick is useful. He is useful in the same way Homer is useful as a safety inspector. He is a credentialed professional whose credentials are real enough to satisfy any casual inspection and whose competence is low enough to ensure that nothing gets fixed in a way that might embarrass the people responsible for why things are broken. A truly competent physician in Springfield would eventually notice things, would begin asking questions about the unusually high rates of certain conditions, certain neurological presentations, certain physical anomalies that cluster with remarkable statistical density in this particular zip code. A competent physician would run blood panels and compare them to national averages and find that the numbers in Springfield sit outside the expected ranges in ways that demand explanation. Dr. Nick does not run those kinds of panels. Dr. Nick does not notice statistical clusters. Dr. Nick performs procedures, collects fees, and returns to his office, and Springfield General keeps cycling through patients without ever arriving at a conclusion about what is making all those patients sick in the first place. But there is another doctor in Springfield who is slightly more complicated than Dr. Nick, and his story is where this theory gets its teeth. Dr. Julius Hibbert is the Simpson family's primary physician. He appears throughout the series as a warm, avuncular figure who laughs at inappropriate moments and delivers difficult news with the sunny detachment of a man who has made his peace with everything. He is competent, or at least he appears competent. He forms actual diagnoses. He provides actual medical advice. He is, relative to Dr. Nick, a serious professional. And yet Dr. Hibbert has seen the Simpson family across decades of appointments, across injuries and illnesses and developmental checkups and emergency visits, and he has never once initiated a serious conversation about what the environment they are living in might be doing to their long-term health. He has never pulled Homer aside and said, in a measured clinical voice, that the blood work they ran last quarter contains some numbers that concern him. He has never written a formal report to the state health department about the constellation of unusual presentations he sees in patients who live within a certain radius of the nuclear power plant. He has instead laughed. He has laughed at Homer's weight. He has laughed at Homer's various injuries. He has laughed in the specific way that the show uses to signal that Dr. Hibbert finds the situation simultaneously amusing and professionally manageable, that whatever he is looking at does not require escalation. The laugh is the tell, because if you are a physician in a town where a significant percentage of your patients display anomalous physical characteristics, work in or live adjacent to a facility with 342 documented safety violations, and consume water from a source that has been shown to produce three-eyed mutations in the local fish population, the appropriate professional response is not a warm chuckle. The appropriate professional response is alarm. The appropriate professional response is documentation, referral, and a very uncomfortable phone call to someone with regulatory authority. Dr. Hibbert never makes that call. He has been not making that call for 6 years. The question the show does not ask is whether he is not making it because he does not see the problem, or because he has been very clearly shown, at some point in his career in this town, what happens to professionals who start noticing things they are not supposed to notice. Springfield has a mechanism for dealing with people who notice too much. We see it in the episode where the real Seymour Skinner is tied to a railroad car and physically expelled from the community for the crime of being honest. We see it in the way Mona Simpson was forced into exile for decades because she acted on what she knew about Burns's weapons facility. We see it in the way that every reporter, every investigator, every outside authority who arrives in Springfield with the intention of uncovering something inevitably leaves without having uncovered very much at all. Doctors are not immune to this mechanism. Doctors in a town owned by a billionaire who has spent over a century building infrastructure designed to protect his interests are doctors who understand, at some professional and perhaps pre-conscious level, that there are certain questions you do not ask if you want to keep your hospital privileges. So, Springfield General operates. It processes patients. It employs a staff that ranges from the merely uninspired to the genuinely dangerous. And it maintains, across its entire institutional existence, a studied incuriosity about the most obvious medical mystery in its immediate environment. Which is, simply stated, why does the local fish population display documented genetic mutation while the human population is presumed to be unaffected? Why does the richest man in town require a weekly medical treatment involving radiation just to stay alive, while the townspeople who drink from the same water table are apparently fine? Springfield General does not ask these questions. Springfield General processes and charges and laughs at inappropriate moments and keeps the cycle running. And somewhere, in an office with very good locks and very thick walls, someone who understands the full picture is presumably grateful that the hospital does exactly that and nothing more. Now let us go deeper into the hospital itself, because there is one specific aspect of Springfield General's operation that deserves its own extended consideration, and it connects to one of the most under-examined recurring elements of the entire series: the nurses. Not Dr. Nick, not Dr. Hibbert. The nurses, the background staff, the women in pale uniforms who appear in the background of hospital scenes and almost never speak in ways that advance the plot. They are fixtures. They are part of the hospital's visual vocabulary, the way the waiting room chairs and the beeping monitors are part of that vocabulary. They establish that this is a hospital. They are the human furniture of a medical setting. But across many, many episodes, there is something quietly strange about how these background characters move through the hospital. They are always present. They are always working, and they are never, in any episode that examines Springfield General in any detail, shown to be concerned about the things that should concern them. When Homer flatlines in the coma episode, the nurses respond with the professional efficiency of people who have done this before, many times before. When patients arrive with injuries that defy standard medical explanation, the nursing staff processes those injuries with the calm of an institution that has decided, collectively and apparently irrevocably, that unusual does not mean alarming. When children are brought in from the school down the road with presentations that cluster in statistically improbable ways, the nurses chart and medicate and send those children home to their families without raising a flag. The nursing staff of Springfield General is the last institutional filter between the hospital's accumulated knowledge of what is happening to the population and whatever authority might act on that knowledge. And that filter, the show tells you in the quiet accumulation of scene after scene after scene, is holding. It is holding because the people behind it have been there long enough to understand what happens to institutional memory in Springfield. They have watched colleagues come and go. They have watched administrations change, and regulatory inspectors arrive and depart without consequence. They have watched the town absorb revelation after revelation and return to baseline. And they have concluded, as rational professionals in an irrational environment eventually do conclude, that the system is not interested in being disrupted. So the nurses chart, and the doctors chuckle, and Dr. Nick performs surgeries with indeterminate instruments, and Springfield General processes its patients in a perpetual holding pattern, and the town remains exactly as sick as it needs to be to keep everyone occupied. And somewhere down the hall, from the room where Homer went into a coma, from which he may never have woken up, there is a vending machine that still dispenses candy bars to anyone with enough quarters and enough faith that the machine will not tip over and crush them. It has not been removed. Of course it has not been removed. Removing it would be an acknowledgement that something went wrong. And Springfield General, like Springfield itself, has a deep institutional commitment to the position that nothing has gone wrong. Everything is proceeding as expected. The patients are cycling through. The bills are being generated. The doctors are laughing. And the town outside the hospital windows is yellow and four-fingered and ageless. And the cooling towers are cracked. And the fish in the river have 3 eyes. And nobody who works in that building is going to be the one to put all of that in a report, because they know what happens to people in this town who write reports. Hey, if you're watching this right now, drop a comment letting us know where you're watching from and what time it is there. And if this is the kind of thing you like falling asleep to, Hit subscribe so you never miss one. Now let's keep going. Number. Section 2. The donut dimension and Homer's relationship with the shape of the universe. Homer Simpson likes donuts. This is not a theory. This is perhaps the single most documented fact in all of Springfield's extensive and contradictory canon. Homer likes donuts the way certain forces of nature like certain other forces of nature. It is fundamental. It is pre-rational. It is the bedrock upon which a significant portion of his identity is built, and it has been consistent across 36 seasons in a way that almost nothing else in the show can claim. But the donut is not just a character trait. The donut, in The Simpsons, is a shape, and the shape of the donut, the torus, which is the mathematical term for the three-dimensional version of that particular ring, shows up in the show in a context so specific and so strange that it has been discussed by actual cosmologists in peer-reviewed adjacent spaces, and the show itself put it there on purpose. Let us build to this slowly, because it deserves the approach. In a 1999 episode, Homer grapples with a mathematical problem in a way that feels, for Homer, unusually engaged. The episode eventually produces an equation, scrawled in Homer's handwriting, that approximates the mass of the Higgs boson particle years before that particle was experimentally confirmed. This has been noted before. It is a famous piece of Simpsons trivia, and it points to the show's writing staff having genuine scientific sophistication, which we already know from other evidence they possess in abundance. But there is another moment, less discussed, where Homer sits with a donut in his hand and floats a theory. Not a joke, not a non sequitur, but an actual cosmological hypothesis presented in the flat, slightly dreamy tone that Homer uses when his brain is doing something it does not fully understand it is doing. He proposes that the universe might be shaped like a donut. He says this looking at the donut. He says it with the sincerity of a man who has arrived at a conclusion through a process he cannot quite articulate and does not particularly want to examine too closely. He is not being absurd. He is not making a joke that the show expects you to recognize as a joke. He is genuinely proposing it. And years later, cosmologists studying cosmic microwave background radiation found patterns suggesting that the universe might, in fact, have a toroidal topology. The universe might be shaped like a donut. Not certainly, not definitively, but the data, the actual observational data from studying the oldest light in existence, contains features that would be consistent with a universe that loops back on itself in the specific mathematical way that a torus loops back on itself. Homer Simpson sat on his couch in Springfield and intuited a cosmological model that professional scientists are still debating. Now, the easy explanation for this, and it is not a wrong explanation, is that the show's writers were scientifically literate enough to be aware of ongoing debates in theoretical cosmology and inserted a reference to a fringe but legitimate scientific hypothesis in a way that could be played as a Homer joke while also being technically accurate. That is plausible. That is consistent with what we know about how the show's writing room operated during its peak years. But the theory that is more interesting and more consistent with everything else the show has been quietly telling us for 3 decades goes somewhere different. The donut is not just a food Homer likes. The donut is the shape of Homer's reality. And Homer, on some level that he does not have the cognitive architecture to fully process or articulate, knows this. Here is what the donut as a shape actually is. It is a surface that loops. It is a geometry where traveling in one direction long enough eventually brings you back to where you started, where edges that appear to be borders are actually connections to the opposite side, where the concept of an edge is fundamentally misleading because there are no true edges, only surfaces that curve back into themselves. Inside a torus, if you walked in a straight line for long enough, you would eventually return to your starting point, having never turned around, never encountered a wall, never reached an end. This is precisely how Springfield operates. The episodes loop. The characters return to their starting positions. The catastrophes reset. The memories erase. Every journey Homer takes away from Evergreen Terrace, whether physical or narrative or psychological, eventually curves back around and deposits him exactly where he began. He does not travel in a line. He travels in a torus. He goes out and comes back and goes out and comes back, tracing the same surface over and over, and the surface has no end because the surface was never meant to end. When Homer holds a donut and looks at it and says that maybe the universe is shaped like this, he is describing his own life. He is describing, with the simple, intuitive clarity of a man who cannot fully understand what he knows, the exact geometry of his existence. He is a being who lives inside a loop, who has always lived inside a loop, who was built for a loop and cannot imagine existing outside of one. And the donut is always waiting for him. Krispy Kreme, Lard Lad, the ones at the nuclear plant with the pink frosting and the sprinkles that he eats during meltdown warnings while his actual job goes catastrophically unattended. The donut is always there, and Homer is always drawn to it, with a gravitational consistency that the show uses as comedy, but that, under closer inspection, looks a lot like a man returning compulsively to the emblem of his own geometric fate. Let us follow this into darker territory, because the donut geometry of Springfield has implications that extend well beyond Homer's breakfast habits. If Springfield is shaped like a torus, if the town's narrative and physical reality curves back on itself rather than progressing in a linear direction, then several things that look like failures of continuity from the outside start to look like structural features from the inside. The show's famous inability to maintain consistent geography, the way Springfield borders 4 different states depending on which episode you watch, the way the town seems to have mountains in some episodes and coastlines in others and vast uninhabited wilderness in others, is not a failure of cartographic imagination. It is what a toroidal geography looks like to someone who is moving along its surface. You keep seeing different things, but you are always on the same surface. The edges connect. The apparently contradictory features are not contradictions at all. They are just the visible result of a topology that bends back on itself. And time in a torus works the same way. There is no linear progression because there is no line. There is only surface, curving forward and backward and sideways simultaneously, always bringing you back to the same reference points. Bart is 10 years old and has been 10 years old for 36 years. Not because time has stopped, but because the timeline is curved. Homer has worked at the power plant for his entire adult life and has never progressed beyond Sector 7G, not because he is incapable of change, but because the shape of his reality does not permit linear advancement. You move along the surface and you return to the surface, and the surface is always the same surface. The coma theory intersects with this in a way that is almost unbearably elegant. If Homer is dreaming, if the show since April 1993 is the product of an unconscious mind, then the dreaming brain is not constrained to produce linear narrative. Dreams do not progress. Dreams loop. Dreams circle back to the same images, the same people, the same house at the end of the same street, over and over, with variations, with complications, but always returning. A dreaming brain would not produce a Springfield that ages and progresses and concludes. It would produce a Springfield shaped like a donut, curved back on itself, endlessly revisiting the same points on the same surface with the same cast of characters in the same general configuration. Homer's dream Springfield is a torus. Of course it is. He was looking at a donut in his hand and intuiting the geometry of his own unconscious mind. But let us go further, because the donut theory has a specific relationship with Homer's cognitive history that the show has never quite assembled into a complete picture, but has left all the pieces for, scattered across decades of episodes, waiting to be connected. When the crayon was removed from Homer's brain and his intelligence surged to genius level, what did he do with that intelligence? He did not solve crimes. He did not dismantle Burns's operation. He did not free Springfield from its loop. He sat down and he thought, and he saw the world clearly for the first time, and it was, as the episode documents with genuine sadness, completely unbearable. The clarity was worse than the fog. Intelligence, in Homer's case, was not a gift. It was a burden of perception he was not equipped to carry. And here is the specific thing he saw when he was smart. The thing the episode gestures toward but does not fully state. He saw the shape of his life. He saw the torus. He saw that nothing was progressing, that the loops were loops, and the resets were resets, and that the geometry of Springfield would never allow him to go anywhere that was not eventually just another point on the same curved surface. And this understanding, this clear geometric perception of his own trapped existence, was what made intelligence unbearable. So he put the crayon back in. He chose not to see it anymore. He chose the donut over the diagram. That choice is simultaneously the most human thing Homer Simpson has ever done and the most heartbreaking. He was given the ability to perceive his prison, and he asked to have that ability removed because the prison, when you cannot see its walls, is indistinguishable from a home. The torus, when you cannot perceive the curvature, feels like a comfortable and familiar place where the beer is cold and the family is always there when you get home. Homer chose to feel like he was home. There is a recurring visual in the show that connects to this theory in a way that feels almost too neat, but the show put it there, so it deserves attention. The couch gag. Every episode of The Simpsons begins with the same sequence. The family rushes home from wherever they are. They run through the door. They collapse onto the couch in front of the television. The opening sequence ends. The episode begins. And then, 22 minutes later, the episode ends. And the family is exactly where they were at the beginning. On the couch, in the house, at the same address, ready to begin again. The couch gag is a joke. It is also, under the torus theory, a precise description of what the show is. Every episode is one loop of the surface. Every episode begins at the couch and ends at the couch. Every episode traces one complete circuit of the same curved geometry. The gag is the show's thesis statement presented so nakedly and so obviously at the top of every single episode that it has become invisible through familiarity. They show you the loop every time. They have always shown you the loop. And the loop is shaped like a donut. Now let us talk about what the donut means for Maggie. Maggie, who we will discuss in much greater depth in a later section, has a specific and deeply strange relationship with the concept of cycles. She is 1 year old. She has been 1 year old for 36 years. She has existed inside the loop longer than any other character, in the sense that she has the most to gain from the loop's continuation. An infant who is always an infant never has to face the terrifying prospect of becoming something else. Never has to grow up in a town that, as the radiation theory makes clear, has done genuinely horrible things to the biological development of everyone who lives there. Maggie's perpetual infancy is not just a narrative convenience. Inside the torus, inside the curved geometry of Springfield's reality, Maggie is the point on the surface that moves the least. She is, in some sense, the anchor of the loop, the still point around which everything else revolves. Homer moves. Homer goes on adventures and holds different jobs and meets presidents and travels to space. Homer traces enormous arcs across the surface of the torus, but Maggie sits in her high chair and watches. And at the end of every episode, Homer returns to the couch, and Maggie is in approximately the same position she was in when he left. The same age, the same pacifier, the same enormous eyes tracking everything. She is the center of the donut, the hole in the middle, the point that the surface curves around without ever touching, which is either a strangely beautiful observation about the show's geometry or an extremely unsettling metaphor for what the youngest member of the Simpson family actually represents in the structure of Springfield's reality. The unmoved mover, the fixed point around which the loop turns. Homer would not understand any of this. Homer looks at a donut and feels a pure, uncomplicated love for it that bypasses analysis entirely. He does not theorize about the donut's topology. He eats the donut. He enjoys it completely. He forgets about it the moment it is gone. And then he gets another one. The donut is replaced. The loop continues. The universe curves back on itself. And somewhere in Homer's brain, behind the crayon and the radiation damage and the decades of accumulated fog, something knows this. Something has always known this. Something occasionally manifests this knowledge as an offhand comment that lands with the eerie precision of a man who is accidentally channeling a cosmological truth he has no business knowing. The universe might be shaped like a donut. Homer said it while holding a donut. He was not wrong. He is almost never wrong about the big things. He is catastrophically wrong about the immediate, the practical, the specific. But the big things, the shape of reality, the nature of time, the geometry of love and family and home, Homer understands those with a clarity that his intelligence tests would never suggest he possesses. Because those things are not measured by IQ. They are felt. They are felt in the way you feel the shape of a donut when you hold it in your hand, warm from the fryer, before you think about it at all. The donut is a loop. The loop is the show. The show is Homer's universe. And Homer's universe, curved and toroidal and eternally cycling, is the most comfortable prison anyone has ever designed. And every morning, Homer wakes up and goes to the power plant, and comes home and sits on the couch, and the couch gag plays, and the episode begins. And 22 minutes later, the couch receives him again, and the loop completes, and the credits roll, and the surface curves forward into the next episode, which will begin in exactly the same place this one did. It is a donut. It has always been a donut. Homer knew it before any of us. He just needed something to eat it with. Number Section 3. Sideshow Bob and the impossibility of leaving Springfield. Sideshow Bob wants to kill Bart Simpson. He has wanted to kill Bart Simpson for the better part of 36 years. He has designed elaborate plots. He has engineered situations of theatrical complexity. He has arrived in Springfield with schemes that involve criminal masterminds, international criminal organizations, ancient family vendettas, and at least one instance of setting an entire Italian village as an elaborate trap. He has come closer to completing his goal than any recurring antagonist in the history of animated television, and he has failed every single time, in ways that range from slapstick to genuinely mysterious. Most people treat this as the premise of a running joke. Sideshow Bob tries to kill Bart. Bart survives through luck and the intervention of plot. Bob is arrested, Bob escapes, or is released. Bob tries again. This is true as far as it goes. But the pattern underneath the joke, the specific pattern of how Bob fails and when he fails, and what prevents him from succeeding in the moments when success seems mathematically certain, is far stranger than the joke has ever acknowledged. And the mystery of Sideshow Bob is not really about whether he will eventually kill Bart. The mystery of Sideshow Bob is about why a man of his evident intelligence and genuine capability has spent decades in a loop he seems incapable of breaking, and what that loop reveals about the specific gravity of Springfield and the things it does to the people caught in its orbit. Let us start with who Sideshow Bob actually is, because the show takes it for granted that you know and the show is right, but the specifics are worth revisiting carefully. Robert Underdunk Terwilliger Jr. He was, before Bart Simpson entered his life, one of the most accomplished men in Springfield. He is a graduate of Yale University. He is an enthusiastic and knowledgeable devotee of high culture, with a particular passion for Gilbert and Sullivan operettas, classical literature, and a standard of aesthetic refinement that is genuinely exceptional by any measure. He is articulate, he is eloquent, he is capable of delivering spontaneous lectures on art and music that display genuine expertise rather than the pretension of someone performing expertise. He is, by the conventional markers of intellectual achievement, brilliant. He was also, before everything went wrong, Krusty the Clown's sidekick. This is the detail that the show treats as backstory, but that is actually the foundational tragedy of Bob's entire character. A Yale-educated man of genuine cultural sophistication spent years as a sidekick to a clown, as the comic foil to a performer whose act Bob found, by every indication the show provides, aesthetically offensive. As the butt of jokes he did not write and did not find funny and was contractually obligated to participate in. The humiliation of that arrangement is enormous. The show gestures at it occasionally, but never quite stares directly at how completely it defines Bob's arc. Bob did not frame Krusty for armed robbery because he is evil in some simple cartoon sense. He did it because he had been ground into a secondary role for years, playing a buffoon for the entertainment of an audience he considered beneath him, and he cracked. He cracked in the specific way that extremely intelligent and extremely proud people crack when their circumstances have demanded too long that they make themselves small. Bart caught him. This is the specific injury that the show builds its running gag on top of. A child, a 10-year-old child with no formal training, no institutional resources, and no particular genius for detection, caught Robert Underdunk Terwilliger Jr. and sent him to prison. The intellectual humiliation of that event is, if you follow it seriously, almost as devastating as the physical consequence. A Yale man beaten by a child with a cartoon. And the child is Bart Simpson, who is not dumb exactly, but who is also definitively not an intellectual. Bart is cunning and instinctive and streetwise in ways that Bob is not. But he is not Bob's equal, and he knows it, and Bob knows it. And yet Bart has defeated Bob more times than can be comfortably enumerated, through a combination of luck and instinct, and the specific kind of spatial awareness that comes from being small and quick and low to the ground in a world full of tall, elaborate plans. This is the wound that drives everything. It is not really about Bart specifically. It is about what Bart represents. The defeat of sophistication by instinct, the triumph of chaos over order, the victory of the gutter over the gallery. Every time Bob designs a plan and executes it with care, and watches it collapse because a 10-year-old happened to sneeze at the wrong moment, or his enormous feet hit a rake, It is a reenactment of the original humiliation. But here is the thing the show has been building toward for decades, without quite arriving at the explicit statement. Bob cannot kill Bart. Not just because the plot will not allow it, though of course the plot will not allow it. He cannot kill Bart because if Bart were gone, Bob would have nothing. Think about what Bob's life looks like in the episodes where his antagonism with Bart is temporarily suspended, where he has been released and is attempting rehabilitation, where the show has experimented with Bob in a non-villainous role, as a candidate for public office, as a father, as a man in Italy apparently living a peaceful life before Springfield's gravity pulled him back. In those episodes, Bob is not content. He is not liberated. He is a man without a purpose, which, for a person of Bob's intellectual intensity, is a specific kind of misery that is arguably worse than being in prison. Springfield is Bob's trap. It is a very comfortable, very specific trap, and it works on him differently than it works on the other residents, because Bob is, unlike most Springfield residents, fully aware of the trap and still cannot escape it. The radiation has not dimmed his perception. The collective denial has not erased his memory. He sees Springfield for exactly what it is, a small and limited environment full of people he considers beneath him, presided over by an ancient billionaire running a slow-motion industrial disaster, organized around a family he has made into his life's work to destroy. And he stays. He keeps coming back. Every escape, every international adventure, every attempt to build a life elsewhere curves back to Evergreen Terrace. Bob is caught in Springfield's gravitational field the same way Homer is caught in it, but where Homer cannot perceive the trap because the radiation and the crayon and the decades of fog have made him incapable of the necessary perception, Bob perceives the trap completely and cannot leave anyway. This is a different and arguably darker horror. To see the walls of your prison with perfect clarity and find yourself unable to leave, not because you lack the intelligence to devise an escape, but because the escape itself is meaningless without the thing you would be escaping toward. Bob can go anywhere. He has. He has gone to Italy and built a life. He has gone to the sea. He has gone to remote and beautiful places. And in all of them, the thought of Bart Simpson, the ongoing fact of Bart's existence, the unfinalizable nature of the original humiliation, has been enough to pull him back. The show presents this as Bob's flaw, his obsession, the villain's inability to let go of his monomania. But the quieter reading is that Bob's return to Springfield is not a flaw. It is the most honest thing about him. It is Bob acknowledging, in the only way his pride allows him to acknowledge anything, that Springfield is where he belongs. Not because Springfield is good for him, not because it makes him happy, but because the loop he is caught in, the loop of his rivalry with Bart, is the only context in which Bob's particular combination of intelligence and rage and frustrated sophistication has ever found a home. He is the most educated person in Springfield. He is the most cultured person in Springfield. He is, in the ways that Bob would care about, demonstrably superior to almost everyone he shares the zip code with. And he cannot leave, because leaving would mean admitting that the superior person lost, that the Yale man was beaten by the cartoon and stayed beaten, that the loop was the end of the story. Bob will not let the loop be the end of the story, so he keeps cycling through it, adding new episodes to the same arc, convinced at some level that this time will be different, that this plan is the one that will finally resolve the narrative in the direction he needs it to resolve. He is, in this sense, a mirror of the show itself. The show keeps cycling too. It keeps returning to the same family, the same address, the same configuration of characters. The show will not let the loop end either. Bob and the Simpsons are running on the same engine. The engine of not being finished yet. The engine of one more attempt, one more episode, one more plan. The engine that Springfield runs on, that has been running for 36 years, that keeps the whole impossible city of it turning. Now let us talk about the specific pattern of Bob's failures, because there is something in that pattern that the show has never directly addressed, but that becomes visible when you look at the full sequence of his attempts across the series. Bob's failures are almost never the result of something Bart does. Bart does not outwit Bob. Bart does not defeat Bob's plans through superior strategy. When Bob fails, it is usually because something intervenes from outside the expected structure of the plot. A rake, an allergic reaction to the sap of a particular tree at a particular moment, a Gilbert and Sullivan number that he cannot stop singing despite the obvious tactical disadvantage of singing it. An intervention from an authority Bob did not account for. Bad luck. Worse luck. The specific cosmic indignity of enormous feet on a hard floor. The pattern of Bob's failures is a pattern of the universe declining to cooperate with a man who has done everything right. He prepares meticulously. He plans exhaustively. He executes with precision. And then something stupid and small and completely outside his elegant design happens, and the whole thing falls apart. This is not just the structure of a running joke. This is Bob's condition. This is what Springfield does to the extremely intelligent people who try to operate within it. Springfield is not a rational environment. Springfield does not reward sophisticated planning with proportionate results. Springfield is the specific kind of chaotic system that makes a joke of elaborate preparation because the chaos is too fundamental, too built in, too much a feature of the town's underlying reality to be successfully planned around. Homer thrives in Springfield because Homer does not plan. Homer moves through chaos as a native element, an organism perfectly adapted to an unpredictable environment because he long ago stopped trying to predict it. Homer's stupidity, which the radiation and the crayon and the decades of exposure have deepened and maintained, is actually adaptive. It is the specific kind of cognitive architecture that Springfield rewards, because Springfield is a place where the elaborate plan fails and the impulsive gesture succeeds. Bob has tried to overcome this by being extremely smart and planning extremely well, and Springfield has beaten him every time by being too chaotic to be outwitted. He cannot change. He is too intelligent to become Homer. He cannot stop planning. He cannot stop designing. He cannot embrace the rake as a valid strategy. And so he fails, every time, in ways that are specific and humiliating and, at this point, so predictable that even Bob must see the pattern. But he tries again. He will always try again. Because the alternative is to admit that the rake wins. That chaos is the organizing principle. That Bart Simpson, who stumbles through life without a plan and somehow always ends up fine, has discovered something about how Springfield works that Robert Underdunk Terwilliger Jr., for all his Yale degrees and Gilbert and Sullivan and boundless cultural sophistication, will never be able to replicate. And Bob cannot live with that, so he comes back, and the loop continues. And Springfield turns. There is one more thread in Bob's story that deserves extended attention, because it connects directly to the show's larger themes in a way that is almost too clear to have been accidental. Sideshow Bob had a son, Gino, a small, enthusiastic boy who arrived in an episode where Bob appeared to be living a peaceful life in Tuscany with a woman named Francesca. Gino is cheerful. Gino is warm. Gino is, by any standard measure, a happy child in a functioning family, which is remarkable because his father is one of the most prolific attempted murderers in animated television history. And in the episode where Gino appears, he tries to help Bob kill Bart. He is enthusiastic about it. He is a toddler with a knife and a willingness to use it that the show plays as a dark joke, but that is, if you sit with it, deeply sad. Bob has passed the loop on to his child. The obsession has become hereditary. The trap has been transmitted across a generation. Gino did not choose Springfield. Gino did not choose the vendetta. Gino did not choose to be born into the specific and exhausting orbit of his father's unresolved humiliation. But Gino is there. Gino is part of the loop. Gino is, in the most literal sense, the continuation of the story past the point where it should have ended. Bob could not kill Bart. He has made someone who will try to kill Bart. The loop generates the next loop. The cycle propagates itself into the next generation. Springfield does this. Springfield takes the obsessions of one generation and builds them into the inheritance of the next. Homer is broken because his father made a deal and his mother was driven away and Burns destroyed a family for a grudge. Now that brokenness is Homer's, and Homer has passed something of it to his children. The town perpetuates its damage across time because the loop itself is the inheritance mechanism. Bob has given Gino a knife. Homer has given Bart a home above a contaminated water table. The gifts are different. The mechanism is the same. Springfield holds everyone it touches, some through love, some through damage, some through the specific gravity of an unresolved narrative that refuses to conclude. And the people who can see this most clearly, the Bobs and the Lisas and the Monas who perceive the trap with something approaching full clarity, are the ones who are most utterly unable to escape it. Because Springfield's trap is not made of bars, it is made of story. And story is the one kind of prison that the intelligent mind cannot think its way out of. Because thinking about the story is just more story. The analysis becomes part of the loop. The theory becomes another thread in the web. Bob knows this. Bob has probably always known this. He just cannot stop planning anyway. Because he is Bob. Because the plan is all he has. Because the rake is always there, somewhere off to the side of the most elaborate scheme ever designed, waiting with the infinite, stupid patience of a thing that does not need to be clever to win. Section 4. The Lisa Parallel and the Child Who Aged in Secret. Lisa Simpson is 8 years old. She has been 8 years old for 36 years, which means she has been 8 years old for longer than most of the people who have ever watched this show. She has spent 3.5 decades as a second grader in a school that never promotes her, in a family that never fully understands her, in a town that treats her intelligence as a curiosity at best and an inconvenience at most. She is, by any reasonable assessment, the most consistently characterized person in Springfield. Homer changes depending on what the episode needs. Marge bends to accommodate the plot's emotional requirements. Bart oscillates between anarchist and surprisingly tender depending on which version of his character the writers wanted that week. But Lisa has remained, across 36 seasons and nearly 800 episodes, fundamentally and stubbornly herself. Intelligent, principled, compassionate to a degree that costs her something real every time she exercises it. Isolated by a mind that the people around her cannot match and would not try to. The standard reading of Lisa's unchanging nature is that she is frozen in the same amber as everyone else in Springfield. The floating timeline, the cartoon logic, the production reality of an animated series that cannot allow its characters to age without ending itself, these apply to Lisa as they apply to everyone. She is 8 because she has always been 8 because the show needs her to be 8. But Lisa's specific freeze is different from the others in ways that become more visible the longer you look at them. Homer's freeze makes psychological sense under the coma theory, where the dreaming mind preserves the family at the last point of conscious memory. Maggie's freeze is arguably protective, saving her from the visible trajectory of what growing up in Springfield would do to a person of her particular sensitivity. Bart's freeze is almost comfortable, the eternal 10-year-old in a permanent summer of mischief and easy consequence. Lisa's freeze is a tragedy, because Lisa is the one character who has shown us, explicitly and in considerable detail, what she would become if time were allowed to pass. She has been given her future. The show handed it to her in an episode called Lisa's Wedding and then took it back. And what the show revealed in that episode is so specifically heartbreaking that it reframes every subsequent appearance of 8-year-old Lisa in a way that is almost hard to watch. Lisa's Wedding aired in 1995. It projected Lisa into the year 2010, when she would be approximately 23 years old and engaged to a British man named Hugh Parkfield at a prestigious American university. She had become a scholar. She had become accomplished, sophisticated, everything that Springfield tried to prevent her from being, and that she fought every day of her frozen 8-year-old existence to move toward. She had, in the future the show imagined for her, gotten out. But she had not fully left. The episode is constructed around the discovery that Hugh, despite his evident affection for Lisa, does not like the Simpson family. He finds them embarrassing. He does not want them at the wedding. And Lisa, who has spent 23 years working toward exactly the kind of cultivated, serious life that Springfield could never provide, discovers in this moment that she cannot leave Springfield behind, cannot leave her family behind, cannot choose sophistication over love, even when sophistication is everything she has worked for. She breaks off the engagement. She goes home for dinner with her family. The episode ends, and then she is 8 years old again. The flash forward is revoked. The future is locked away. And the Lisa who chose her family, who chose Springfield, who chose love over the clean escape she had earned, that Lisa is wiped and replaced by the second grader with the saxophone and the principled frustration and the desperate search for meaning in an environment that has never once made meaning easy. The cruelty of this is very specific. The show showed Lisa her future, made her choose to love her family over it, and then denied her the 8-year-old version of that knowledge. Adult Lisa chose. Child Lisa does not know she has already chosen. Every episode where 8-year-old Lisa fights for something, argues with someone, tries to change Springfield for the better, is an episode where someone who has already made the definitive choice of her life is going through the motions of believing she has not yet made it. She fights every day in a war she has already decided to lose in the direction of love. But here is where the theory gets more complicated and more interesting. than the standard reading of Lisa's wedding as a sweet and bittersweet meditation on family versus ambition. Because there is another reading of that episode, one that the show does not push you toward but that the evidence supports. Lisa did not choose Springfield. Lisa chose not to be with Hugh. Those are different things. Hugh was not Springfield's opposite. Hugh was a different kind of confinement. A life with Hugh would have been a life performing a version of sophisticated escape that was really just a different set of expectations from a different kind of person who still could not quite see her fully. Hugh wanted Lisa without the Simpsons, which means Hugh wanted a Lisa who did not actually exist. He wanted the brilliant, accomplished surface without the family that made the brilliance possible and the Springfield that made the escape necessary. Lisa breaking off the engagement was not a choice to stay small. It was a refusal to amputate herself to fit inside someone else's vision of who she should be. Hugh wanted a Lisa cleaned of her context. And Lisa, to her enormous credit, decided she would rather be lonely and whole than partnered and partial. This reading does not change the tragedy of her return to 8 years old. It deepens it. Because if the break with Hugh was not a surrender but an act of self-preservation, then the reset is even more painful. The 8-year-old fighting to be seen, fighting to be heard, fighting to be taken seriously by a family and a town that persistently underestimates her, does not know that the adult version of herself has already demonstrated that the fighting is not in vain, that the intelligence and the principle and the stubborn refusal to be made smaller are not obstacles to a good life. They are the prerequisites for one. 8-year-old Lisa cannot be told this. The loop has erased the message. She has to keep fighting without knowing the fight is already, in some sense, won. Now let us talk about the parallel, because this is the part of the Lisa theory that genuinely has not been discussed enough. Lisa Simpson and Charles Montgomery Burns are running the same character arc in opposite directions. This sounds absurd. Lisa is 8 and idealistic and compassionate and devoted to the improvement of the world around her. Burns is ancient and cynical and ruthless, and devoted to the extraction of everything valuable from the world around him. They are opposites in the most obvious available senses. But their trajectories are the same. Both of them are, in their respective ways, extremely intelligent people who see Springfield with unusual clarity. Burns sees the town as a resource to be managed and exploited. Lisa sees the town as a problem to be solved and improved. But both of them perceive Springfield for what it is, in a way that most of its residents cannot manage. Both of them are operating, most of the time, several moves ahead of the people around them. Both of them are consistently frustrated by Springfield's inability to change. Burns has spent over a century trying to maintain his control over a town that stubbornly generates resistance he cannot quite eliminate. Lisa has spent 36 years trying to improve a town that stubbornly generates inertia she cannot quite overcome. The tool is different, the frustration is identical, and here is the dark parallel that the show has never explicitly named. Burns is what happens to the kind of intelligence Lisa represents when it spends long enough in a system that rewards exploitation over improvement. Burns did not start as a monster. The show has given us glimpses of young Charles Burns, a child who had warmth in him before the machinery of wealth and power and a century of making self-interested choices grounded away. Burns was made, not born. He was shaped by the system he operated in, the system he eventually came to control and perpetuate. Lisa is 8 years old and already showing the marks of being shaped by her environment. She is isolated, she is chronically dismissed. She has developed a kind of resigned persistence, a faith in the value of the fight that is separate from any realistic expectation of winning it, that looks less like optimism and more like a coping mechanism built around the alternative to optimism being too bleak to contemplate. The show has flashed forward to adult Lisa and shown us someone who retained her values but narrowed her ambitions to the achievable. Someone who escaped Springfield's geography but carried Springfield's weight with her. Someone who could not fully leave because leaving fully would have required leaving herself, and she had already refused to do that once. Burns escaped nothing. Burns extended his Springfield presence infinitely through technology and money and the weekly radiation treatments that keep him alive against all biological logic. He is the person who stayed longest and became most completely what Springfield makes of its intelligent occupants. The parallel trajectory runs like this. High intelligence plus long exposure to Springfield's particular combination of environmental toxicity, institutional corruption, and collective denial produces one of two outcomes. The first is Burns, the intelligence that turns protective and predatory and eventually becomes the system it originally merely navigated. The second is Lisa, the intelligence that turns inward and principled and spends itself fighting the system at great personal cost without ever quite defeating it. Both of them are trapped. Burns in his office at the top of his power plant, connected to his weekly treatments, sustained by Smithers's logistical devotion, unable to die because dying would mean the system he built would have to answer for itself. Lisa in her second-grade classroom, connected to her principled refusals, sustained by her family's imperfect but genuine love, unable to age because aging would mean the show she lives in would have to end. Neither of them can leave. Both of them can see that they cannot leave. And both of them have found their own versions of how to live inside the trap with enough dignity to keep getting up in the morning. Burns's dignity is the dignity of control. He may be poisoned and ancient and maintained by machinery and kept alive by a schedule he cannot manage without Smithers, but he is the man at the top of the hierarchy, and no one in Springfield can do anything about that, and he knows it. Lisa's dignity is the dignity of conscience. She may be ignored and isolated and perpetually 8 years old in a town that does not know what to do with her, but she is the one who will not pretend the three-eyed fish is normal, and no one in Springfield can talk her out of that, and she knows it. They are the two possible outcomes of clear sight in Springfield, and the fact that they live at opposite ends of the same social structure, the richest man and the poorest voice, the most powerful presence and the most ignored one, is not an accident. The show has arranged them this way because their relationship tells you something essential about what intelligence means in a closed system. In a closed system, intelligence either consumes or is consumed. Either it learns to take, or it keeps giving until it has nothing left. Springfield is as closed as systems get, and Lisa and Burns are its two poles. And Lisa, who does not know about Burns's weekly treatments or his century of accumulated institutional power, or his deliberate engineering of the conditions that broke her father's brain, keeps playing her saxophone in the corner of the house on Evergreen Terrace, and keeps getting up the next morning to go fight for something, and keeps believing on some level that it matters even when the evidence for that belief is thin. She is 8 years old. She has always been 8 years old. She will probably always be 8 years old. And in the space of that frozen, impossible age, she is carrying something that the show has never quite found language for, but that everyone who has ever watched her can feel. She is carrying the knowledge, held without access to the memory of how she came to hold it, that loving your people and your home is worth more than a clean escape. That staying yourself is harder than leaving. That the fight for the place you come from, even when the place resists improvement with everything it has, is the fight worth fighting. She does not know she already made this choice. But she makes it again every episode, every time she picks up the saxophone, every time she challenges the assumption everyone else accepts, every time she refuses to pretend the fish are supposed to have 3 eyes. She chose. She keeps choosing, and the loop lets her keep choosing without remembering, which is either a cruelty or a mercy, depending on how you look at it. From inside Springfield, it is very difficult to tell the difference. Number. Section 5. The hidden power of Patty and Selma Bouvier. They are barely discussed. In the grand tradition of Simpsons theories and deep readings, Patty and Selma Bouvier occupy a strange kind of blind spot, present in almost every major family moment across 36 seasons, central enough to the show's DNA that removing them would fundamentally change the texture of the series, and yet almost entirely unexamined as characters with their own coherent and deeply unsettling internal logic. Patty and Selma are Marge's sisters. They work at the Department of Motor Vehicles. They smoke constantly. They are approximately equal in their opinion of Homer, which is to say they regard him with the specific contempt of people who believe their sister made a terrible mistake and have decided that the appropriate response to this belief is to express it in smoke and in biting commentary every chance they get. They have done this for 36 years, with the consistency of a geological feature. And yet, Patty and Selma are arguably two of the most powerful people in Springfield, in ways that the show has been documenting across its entire run without ever quite pointing at the accumulated evidence and saying, "Look at what this means." Let us begin with the DMV. The Department of Motor Vehicles is, in the United States, one of the most universally experienced and universally despised governmental institutions in existence. Almost every American who has reached driving age has had a DMV encounter. Almost all of those encounters share certain features: long waits, bureaucratic process, forms that must be filled out correctly or the whole thing starts over, and the specific power dynamic of the person behind the counter, who controls access to something you need, and who operates according to rules you did not write and cannot argue with. Patty and Selma run the Springfield DMV. They have been running it for 36 seasons. And the thing about running the DMV for 36 seasons in a town as dysfunctional and legally chaotic as Springfield is that over time, through the steady accumulation of documented interactions with the entirety of the driving population, you come to know things about everyone. Every adult in Springfield who has ever gotten a license, renewed a license, failed a driving test, or had a license suspended, has sat across a counter from Patty or Selma, or both. That interaction produces paperwork. Paperwork produces records. Records, in a town where the legal and regulatory infrastructure is as porous and compromised as Springfield's, represent a form of institutional memory that survives even when the collective denial mechanism erases everything else. The DMV knows who has had their license suspended for driving under the influence, and how many times, and when, and in what circumstances. The DMV knows who has had license applications rejected, and what those rejections reveal about the applicant's history. The DMV knows which vehicles are registered to which addresses, which is the kind of information that, in a town full of secrets and buried histories, has a great deal of potential value. Patty and Selma have been sitting at the intersection of this information flow for 3.5 decades. They are, in a very real sense, the keepers of an institutional record that no one else in Springfield has any particular interest in maintaining. The hospital has its charts, but the hospital practices motivated amnesia. The police have their files, but the police are Wiggum, which is its own problem. The courts have their records, but the courts are Judge Snyder, who has demonstrated repeatedly his willingness to issue legally extraordinary decrees in the service of Springfield's collective comfort. The DMV, by contrast, is boring. Nobody glamorizes the DMV. Nobody writes fan theories about the power structure of the Motor Vehicle Administration. And that, from Patty and Selma's perspective, is exactly the point. The boring institution is the one that accumulates real power quietly, over time, without anyone noticing. Burns controls Springfield through money and infrastructure. Patty and Selma control Springfield through paperwork and the slow, steady patience of two women who have nowhere else to be and nothing to prove, and an enormous tolerance for sitting across a counter from people they find deeply inadequate. The Homer angle on this is obvious, and the show exploits it constantly. They hate Homer. They have always hated Homer. They have expressed this hatred with remarkable creativity across 36 seasons, from the comparatively mild insults of the early years to the increasingly elaborate contempt of later seasons. Homer cannot exist in the presence of Patty and Selma without the dynamic asserting itself. He is diminished. He is dismissed. He is the living proof of their theory that their sister made a catastrophic error in judgment and has been paying for it ever since. But there is something beneath the Homer dynamic that is worth separating out, because the show occasionally allows it to surface and it tells a different story. Patty and Selma love Marge. This is not complicated or theorized or buried in subtext. They love their sister with the specific, ferocious loyalty of people who have watched someone they love be persistently undervalued and cannot do anything about it except be present, visibly, with their disapproval of the source of the undervaluation. Their contempt for Homer is the form their love for Marge takes. It is how they say, every visit, every holiday, every birthday gathering, I see how hard you work and I see what you put up with, and I am not going to pretend it is fine. That is not nothing. In Springfield, where collective denial is the default setting and everybody pretends everything is fine, Patty and Selma are the two people who refuse to pretend, who maintain, through decades of cigarette smoke and sarcastic commentary, the position that Marge Simpson is remarkable and her husband is not good enough, and both of these things can be true simultaneously. They are, in this sense, Springfield's most honest witnesses. And Springfield's most honest witnesses have spent 36 years in a position of institutional access that has given them more information about more people than almost anyone else in town. They know things. The cigarettes and the flat affect and the show's comedic framing of them as obstacles to Homer's dignity have thoroughly obscured the fact that Patty and Selma, in possession of decades of DMV records and the specific institutional position that makes them party to information nobody else is paying attention to, are probably the most genuinely knowledgeable people in Springfield about the actual workings of their town. They choose not to act on this knowledge, generally, and the show's comedic framing explains why without ever quite stating it. Patty and Selma do not need to act. They do not have ambitions that require action. They are, by any observable measure, content. Content in the way that people who have found a sustainable position and occupied it for decades are content. They have their work. They have each other. They have their routines. They have MacGyver. They have cigarettes. They have the ongoing project of being present witnesses to their sister's life, and the ongoing project of letting Homer know, every time they see him, that they have not forgotten, and they are not impressed, and the records department is right down the hall. But in specific episodes, in specific moments that the show drops into the comedic flow and then moves away from, the extent of what Patty and Selma actually know about Springfield becomes visible in ways that are genuinely startling. Consider the moment when Patty came out as gay. This was handled with more care and sensitivity than many of the show's forays into consequential character territory, and it was presented as a revelation, something new that the audience and the family were learning. But the subtext underneath the revelation is interesting. Patty has been working at the DMV for decades. She has been, by the show's framing, a largely unhappy person in her personal life. And she has been sitting across from the entirety of Springfield's driving population for that entire time, watching people, learning people, accumulating the specific kind of knowledge about human behavior that comes from processing hundreds of thousands of bureaucratic interactions without any of the usual social pressure to perform interest or affect. The DMV is a place where people are vulnerable. They want something. They need something. They are often frustrated. They are often revealing more of themselves than they intend to, in the specific way that people reveal themselves when they are dealing with bureaucracy and do not feel like they are being observed in any meaningful sense. And Patty, behind the counter, observes all of it. Has been observing it for 36 years. She knows Springfield's people in a way that nobody else does. Not from above, the way Burns knows them through financial leverage. Not from below, the way Homer bumbles through knowing them through shared foolishness. But from the specific sideways angle of the institutional observer, the person with the stamp and the form who has seen everyone at the administrative moment of needing something from the state. And Selma, who has had multiple marriages, who has had multiple attempts at a life that looked different from the DMV life, and who has returned to the DMV each time with the quiet solidity of someone who has tested the alternatives and found them wanting, has her own version of this accumulated knowledge. The marriages gave her access to other parts of Springfield's world. The failures brought her back. The returns added layers to what she knows. Between them, Patty, the G, and Selma represent something that the show has never quite assembled into a single statement, but that is present across the full arc of their appearances. They are the town's memory in a way that is immune to the collective denial mechanism. The DMV's records persist even when Springfield's collective narrative erases events. The paperwork does not forget because the paperwork is not a person and cannot vote to forget. Patty and Selma maintain the archive. And they have chosen, whether through wisdom or through the specific kind of comfortable power that comes from not needing to use what you have, not to do very much with it. They keep watching. They keep smoking. They keep letting Homer know, in the particular register of their contempt, that the records department is aware of the situation, that someone has been documenting all this time, that the information exists even when the town has agreed it should not. In Springfield's architecture of power and denial, that is not nothing. That is, in fact, quite a lot. Number. Section 6. The Shelbyville Mirror, and what the other town knows. There is a town called Shelbyville. It exists just outside Springfield's borders, in the specific way that a shadow exists just outside the object that casts it. Close enough to be affected by the same light, shaped by the same reference, but fundamentally different in ways that become more interesting the longer you examine them. Shelbyville and Springfield are, within the show's mythology, rivals. They have been rivals since their founding, which the show places in the early 19th century when a single group of settlers split into two factions over a disagreement about a fundamental moral question. Jebediah Springfield, the founder of Springfield, wanted to find a new life in a new land. Shelbyville Manhattan, who founded Shelbyville, wanted to find that same new land, but also, specifically, to be able to marry his cousin. This is played as a punchline. Shelbyville's entire existence is framed as the product of a man's desire to do something that his more principled counterpart found unacceptable. Shelbyville is, from Springfield's perspective, the place that started wrong and stayed wrong, the rival town, the enemy territory, the place whose children steal Springfield's lemon trees and whose very name functions as a mild insult within Springfield's borders. But here is what the show has never quite done with Shelbyville, and what the omission reveals. The show has never shown us Shelbyville clearly. Not really. Shelbyville appears in episodes, it is referenced constantly, it serves as the necessary rival that gives Springfield's own dysfunctions a comparison point. But Shelbyville's internal reality, what it actually looks like from inside, what its people are like when they are not serving as Springfield's foils, what its own institutional structure and power dynamics and environmental situation actually are, remains almost entirely unexamined. This is suspicious. Springfield is a town that has been mapped in extraordinary obsessive detail across 36 seasons. Its streets, its buildings, its residents, its history, its politics, its economy, its environmental situation, all of this has been documented in the kind of cumulative detail that makes Springfield one of the most thoroughly rendered fictional environments in the history of the medium. The show has put in the work. Springfield is real in the way that only extended creative attention makes a place real. Shelbyville, directly adjacent, equally old, presumably equally complex, is a sketch. A name, a reference point. A place the show gestures toward when it needs Springfield to have a rival and then withdraws from view. Why would the show spend 36 years making Springfield hyper-real while keeping Shelbyville permanently hazy? The obvious answer is that Shelbyville only exists to serve Springfield's stories, so there is no narrative reason to develop it independently. This is true as a production reality. The show is about Springfield. Shelbyville is a supporting location. But the theory that the show's accumulated evidence supports is something more interesting. Shelbyville cannot be shown clearly because Shelbyville would resolve too many mysteries about Springfield. If Shelbyville exists directly adjacent to Springfield, founded at the same time, drawing from the same regional environment, but operating without a nuclear power plant in its immediate vicinity, then Shelbyville should show us what a town near Springfield looks like without the specific contamination variable. Shelbyville should give us a comparison population, a control group, in the scientific sense, a community of people who live in the same approximate geographic area, with the same approximate historical background, but without three-eyed fish in their local water source. If Shelbyville's residents have 4 fingers and yellow skin, then the radiation theory is complicated, because the contamination zone apparently extends beyond the plant's immediate vicinity. If Shelbyville's residents look different from Springfield's, if they have 5 fingers and normally colored skin and hair that behaves according to recognizable physics, then the radiation theory is essentially confirmed, because the visual difference between the towns would prove that something specific to Springfield is responsible for the physical anomalies of its population. The show cannot let you see this comparison. The show has, for 36 seasons, kept Shelbyville safely in the narrative background precisely because putting Shelbyville on screen in any detail would either confirm or deny the radiation theory, and the show cannot afford to do either while maintaining its studied ambiguity about what is actually happening to the people of Springfield. So Shelbyville stays blurry. Its residents appear in brief, low-stakes contexts. Its interior life is never examined. Its environmental situation is never documented, and Springfield's rivals continue to function as a narrative device rather than an actual place, which is the only way to prevent the comparison from producing conclusions that the show has decided it does not want you to reach. But let us take the theory of Shelbyville further, because there is something even more interesting underneath the surface question of what Shelbyville looks like. Shelbyville was founded by people who left Springfield's founding group over a moral disagreement. This means Shelbyville's population descends from people who, at the foundational moment of the two towns' histories, were willing to separate from the mainstream community rather than accept a norm they found objectionable. They broke from the group. They drew a line. They said, "This far and no further," even if it means going alone. Springfield's population descends from people who stayed. People who, at the foundational moment, went along with Jebediah Springfield's vision even when the group that formed around that vision included some significant internal tensions. Springfield's culture, its specific capacity for collective denial, its institutional commitment to not asking certain questions, its pattern of voting to maintain comfortable fictions over uncomfortable truths. All of this is consistent with a founding population of people who prioritized community solidarity over individual moral stands. Shelbyville's founding population demonstrated the opposite tendency. They valued their specific position enough to leave the larger group. They were willing to be separated from the comfortable solidarity of the majority in order to maintain what they believed was right, even if what they believed was right was itself questionable. The specific moral content of the founding split is irrelevant to this structural point. What matters is the structural character of the populations themselves. Springfield selected for people who stay and conform. Shelbyville selected for people who leave and dissent. And if you are running a closed institutional system that depends on a population's willingness not to investigate certain things, not to ask certain questions, not to challenge certain arrangements, the population you want is Springfield's, not Shelbyville's. You want the people who will vote to maintain the fiction. You want the people whose founding psychology is oriented toward solidarity and collective memory management rather than individual moral stands and principled departure. Burns inherited the perfect population. Or perhaps, given the full scope of the show's hints about how long Burns and his family have been in control of Springfield's resources and institutional arrangements, he cultivated it. The question of which came first, the compliant population or the institutional system that rewards compliance, is not answerable from the evidence the show provides. But the alignment between Springfield's specific psychological tendencies and the requirements of the system that Burns operates is too precise to be accidental. And Shelbyville sits right next door, out of focus, never quite shown, carrying the alternative history of what the region might have looked like if the founding population had made different choices at the original branching point. There is one more dimension of the Shelbyville mystery that deserves attention. In the episode where Springfield's children retrieve their stolen lemon tree from Shelbyville, the children of both towns are shown to be, despite their mutual hostility, fundamentally similar. They have the same rivalries, the same social dynamics, the same basic configuration of individual personalities mapping onto the Springfield children's configurations in ways that suggest the two towns produce similar kinds of people despite their different cultural orientations. This parallel is disturbing in a specific way if you take it seriously. If Shelbyville produces children who are basically the same as Springfield's children despite not having Springfield's specific environmental problems, then either the environmental problems have not yet produced visible developmental differences in the younger generation, or the similarities between the towns run deeper than the differences, and the radiation theory is less explanatory than it seems. Alternatively, and this is the reading that sits most comfortably with everything else the show has built, the Shelbyville children look similar to Springfield's children because the show will not let them look different. The show has made a production decision, visible in every brief depiction of Shelbyville's population, to keep Shelbyville's visual design close enough to Springfield's that no comparison is possible. The children are drawn the same way. They have the same number of fingers. They have the same yellow skin. Either the contamination has spread to Shelbyville, which is genuinely alarming as a plot implication, or the show is protecting its ambiguity by rendering Shelbyville in a visual language that prevents the comparison from functioning as evidence. Both possibilities say something important about Springfield's situation. Neither of them is comfortable, and Shelbyville remains at the edge of the frame, close enough to see, never quite in focus, the town that might tell you everything you want to know if the camera would only turn toward it directly. The camera will not turn. It never does. Springfield keeps the lens on itself, and everything outside that frame stays safely theoretical. That, in the end, is the most Springfield thing about Shelbyville. It exists to define Springfield's borders, and beyond the borders the show offers nothing but fog. Section 7. The Couch Gag Cosmology. Every episode of The Simpsons begins the same way. The music starts, the clouds part, the letters emerge in the specific yellow font that has been one of the most recognizable typographic choices in the history of television. The sequence unfolds through Springfield, past the power plant, through the school and the shopping district and the streets of the town, gathering the family members one by one as they make their separate ways home from the various locations the opening drops them into. And then they arrive at the house, rush through the door, and collapse onto the couch. But the couch is never the same, twice. The couch gag is the 20 to 90 second segment At the end of the opening credits where the family arrives at the couch and something happens that is not what is supposed to happen. Sometimes the couch is missing. Sometimes there are too many Homers. Sometimes the family arrives as different species, or in different time periods, or as the cast of a completely different television show occupying the same living room. Sometimes the couch gag is a fully realized short film by a guest animator, running 3 minutes or more, taking the concept of the family arriving at the couch into genuinely strange territory. Over 36 seasons, the show has produced hundreds of couch gags. They range from simple variations on the arrival setup to complete conceptual deconstructions of the show's own premise. Some are throwaway jokes. Some are quietly the most formally sophisticated things The Simpsons has ever done. And the couch gag, as a recurring structural feature of the show, has accumulated a meaning across its full run that individual episodes never quite acknowledge but that the whole sequence makes visible. The couch gag is the show thinking about itself. Every couch gag is The Simpsons examining, in the compressed space of a few seconds to a few minutes, what it means that this family keeps coming home to this couch. What it means that the journey is always the same and the arrival is always different. What it means that the living room is the fixed point and everything surrounding it is in flux. Let us start with what the couch represents in the show's emotional geography, because this is foundational to everything else. The couch is home, not the house, not Springfield, not the family unit in some abstract sense, but the specific couch in the specific living room at the specific address on Evergreen Terrace. Homer collapses into that couch with the relief of a man arriving at the one place in the world that receives him completely. Marge settles into it with the resigned patience of someone who has learned that the couch is where everything ends up, good and bad and otherwise. Bart lands on it with the anarchic energy of a kid who will immediately want to get up from it. Lisa sits on it with the look of someone who is there because she has nowhere better to be, which is a different thing from being glad to be there. And Maggie is delivered into it by the plot, placed in the family configuration, present in the way that the pacifier is always present. The couch is the show's thesis statement-made furniture. It is the thing the family returns to regardless of where the episode has taken them. Burns can trap them in his mansion. Sideshow Bob can chase them across Europe. The federal government can seal the town under a dome. And by the next week, they are back on the couch, waiting for the episode to begin. The couch is indestructible, not because the plot never threatens it, but because the show cannot function without it. The couch is the reset point, the save state, the location that the show's reality is calibrated around. Now here is the cosmological question that the couch gag, across hundreds of iterations, has been slowly assembling. If the couch is the fixed point, and the journey to the couch is different every time, what kind of universe does that imply? The standard answer, the animation logic answer, is that the couch gag is a joke, a recurring bit, a structural opportunity to do something creative before the episode proper begins. This is true, and it is not the whole answer. The cosmological answer, the one that the full sequence of couch gags supports when you try to hold them all in mind simultaneously, is that the Simpsons universe is one in which the paths to any given destination are infinite, but the destinations themselves are fixed. You can take a million routes to the couch. The couch is always there when you arrive. The journey varies. The destination is invariant. This is actually a reasonably sophisticated cosmological model. It describes a universe where certain points in spacetime are attractors, points that the system inevitably moves toward regardless of initial conditions or path taken, while the paths themselves are unconstrained and can take essentially any shape. The couch is an attractor in the Simpson family's reality. It pulls everything back to itself eventually. And attractors in dynamical systems theory have a specific property that is directly relevant to everything else the show has been doing for 36 seasons. In a system with a strong attractor, the system can move away from the attractor through any trajectory, but will always return to the vicinity of the attractor. The behavior looks chaotic, looks unconstrained, looks like the system is going anywhere and everywhere. But zoom out far enough and you see the pattern. Everything is circling the attractor. Everything is, eventually, returning to the same region of phase space. Every episode of The Simpsons is a trajectory away from and back toward the couch. The family goes somewhere. Something happens. The episode explores territory far from the living room on Evergreen Terrace. And then they come back. They sit on the couch, the credits roll, the attractor has received them again. The couch gag is the show making this explicit at the opening of every episode. It is saying, here is the couch, here is the fixed point, here is the attractor. The journey will be unpredictable. The destination is guaranteed. The form of the arrival varies, but the arrival itself is invariant. Now let us go deeper. Because the couch gag has done something over the full run of the series that no individual episode makes visible, but that the whole sequence reveals. The couch gags have, gradually and acceleratingly over the show's run, become more formally radical. Early couch gags were simple variations on the arrival setup. The couch is already full. Too many family members arrive. Something is on fire. The variations were surprising within a recognizable frame. Later couch gags began dismantling the frame. They imported other animation styles. They questioned the reality of the family. They depicted the couch as a portal to other dimensions, as a philosophical concept, as an absence, as an infinite regress. They showed the family as a series of drawings rather than characters, as evolutionary ancestors of themselves, as part of a food chain that ends with something consuming the entire show. Some couch gags have essentially been philosophical arguments about the nature of the show itself, about what it means that the same family arrives at the same couch in the same house week after week after week, about whether the repetition is comfort or trap, about whether the attractor is a home or a prison. The show has been arguing with itself about this through the couch gag format for 36 years, and it has never resolved the argument because the argument is the point. The couch gag cosmology says this. The Simpsons is a universe with a fixed point that it circles endlessly. The fixed point is the family together in the living room. Everything else, every adventure, every catastrophe, every guest appearance and plot development and character revelation is a trajectory around that fixed point. The trajectories can be wild. The trajectories can take the show into genuinely unexpected territory, but they are always, in the language of dynamical systems, bounded. The attractor constrains the range. And the show knows this. The show has always known this. The couch gag, in its hundreds of iterations, is the show's running commentary on its own structure, on the specific kind of story it is, and the specific kind of story it can never be, on the fixed point and the trajectories and the question of whether those two things together constitute a universe worth inhabiting. The coma theory adds a dimension to this that is almost unbearable. If Homer is dreaming, if the show since April 1993 is the interior monologue of a man in a coma, then the couch gag is Homer's dreaming brain returning, episode after episode, to the single most important image it has. The family on the couch, together, complete, unchanged. The image that the dreaming mind constructs and reconstructs and varies the approach to but cannot relinquish, because the image is not an image of comfort, it is an image of what was lost. The couch, the family, the fixed point. A man in a coma does not dream of adventure. He dreams of home. He dreams of the specific textures of home, the couch's particular softness, the television's blue light in the dim room, the specific weight and warmth of the family he cannot reach. He dreams of arriving there in an infinite variety of ways because the dreaming mind is creative, because it has time, because it can approach the image from every angle but cannot change the image itself, cannot trade it for something else, cannot let it go. Every couch gag is Homer's dreaming brain approaching the couch from a different angle, trying to arrive, always arriving, always finding the same thing when it gets there. The family, together, the television on, everyone in their place, the attractor pulling the trajectory home, every single time, regardless of what path it took to get there. That is the couch gag cosmology. It is the show's architecture of loss and love expressed through 30 seconds of animation at the top of every episode. The journey varies, the couch is always there. And if Homer ever wakes up, the couch will be empty. Section 8. Krusty the Clown and the Collapse of the Performed Self. Herschel Schmoikel Pinchas Yerucham Krustovsky is a clown. He is also the son of a rabbi. He is also a deeply unhappy man who has spent his entire adult life performing a version of joy that bears no relationship to his interior experience. He is also, under the grease paint and the enormous shoes and the trademark squeaky horn, one of the most tragic figures in Springfield's extensive catalog of quiet suffering. Krusty the Clown is the dominant cultural force in Springfield's children's lives. His show has been running continuously on local television for decades. His face has been licensed onto an extraordinary range of merchandise, from breakfast cereal to medical equipment, and the products bearing his name are almost uniformly shoddy and occasionally dangerous. He has a level of cultural penetration in Springfield that Burns achieves through economic dominance, but Krusty achieves through media presence, which is arguably more intimate because it entered the minds of Springfield's children when those children were young enough to believe in clowns. Bart Simpson worships Krusty. This is not an exaggeration, and it is not a passing phase. Bart's devotion to Krusty is one of the show's most consistent and deeply felt character relationships, which is a strange thing to say about the relationship between a child and a television personality, but the show earns it. Krusty represents something to Bart that no other figure in his life provides. Something outside the family, outside Springfield's normal power structure, something that belongs to Bart's interior world rather than to the adult machinery that manages his exterior one. And Krusty is aware of this. He is aware, in the specific way that people who perform for children are aware, of the enormous responsibility that comes with occupying that interior space. He is aware of it, and he is almost completely unable to live up to it, not because he does not care, but because the gap between what Krusty the Clown represents and what Herschel Krustofski actually is has become so wide over the course of his career that he can no longer fully remember which side of it he is on. Let us establish the basic architecture of Krusty's tragedy, because it is more structured than it appears, and the structure illuminates the larger theory. Herschel Krustofski was born into a family that did not want him to be a clown. His father, Rabbi Hyman Krustofski, was a man of genuine moral seriousness who wanted his son to follow in his religious footsteps, to become a man of learning and community, to build a life around the traditions that gave the Krustofski family its meaning. Herschel wanted to make people laugh. The conflict between these two desires produced an estrangement that lasted for years, during which Herschel became Krusty and Krusty became famous, and the distance between father and son calcified into something that looked, from the outside, like a completed severance. The show eventually reconciled father and son, in a moment of genuine warmth that the series handled with the specific care it reserves for the things it considers truly important. But the reconciliation came after decades of estrangement. Decades during which Herschel performed Krusty while Krusty denied Herschel. Decades during which the gap between the performed self and the actual self grew wider and wider, maintained by habit and contract, and the sheer institutional momentum of a media enterprise that depended on Krusty's continued existence as Krusty. This is the specific form of Krusty's tragedy. He did not simply become unhappy. He became structurally incapable of stopping the performance long enough to find out whether the person performing was still there. The show around Krusty, the television production, the merchandise empire, the cultural penetration into Springfield's children's consciousness, all of it requires Krusty to keep being Krusty. The machine has taken on a life independent of its operator, and it will continue regardless of whether the operator is having a good day or a terrible one, regardless of whether Herschel Krustofski is at peace or at war with himself, regardless of whether the grease paint covers a smile or something considerably less cheerful. There is an episode where Krusty is cancelled, where the media environment shifts in a way that makes his show economically non-viable and the network pulls the plug. And Krusty, deprived of the performance that has defined his existence for decades, does not know what to do with himself. He is not liberated. He is lost. The performance was not a mask over a real person. The performance had become the real person, and without the performance, there is not enough of Herschel Krustofski left to fill the space. This is what the show has been documenting across Krusty's appearances, in the accumulation of small moments that each episode drops and then leaves. The gambling addiction, the financial chaos, the health problems that the show treats as comedy but that are, in aggregate, the specific health profile of a man who has been under sustained and unaddressed psychological stress for a very long time. The cynicism that occasionally breaks through the performance in ways that alarm the children watching, who are not supposed to see Herschel through the grease paint. Bart is the child most likely to see through the performance, and Bart is the child most invested in not seeing through it. His love for Krusty is built on the image, on Krusty as performed, and every time the reality of Herschel as actual threatens to puncture the image, Bart navigates around it with the specific loyalty of someone who has decided that the image is worth protecting because the image gives him something real even if the image itself is not real. This is Bart's most sophisticated emotional gesture, and the show almost never names it as such. Now here is the theory that Krusty's trajectory supports, and it connects to the larger structure of Springfield's reality in a way that the show has left visible across the full arc of his appearances. Krusty is what happens to the performed self in Springfield when the performance becomes successful enough to be sustainable indefinitely. He is the show's most extended examination of what it costs to maintain a persona long past the point when the persona was originally useful, when the circumstances that made the performance necessary have changed, but the performance has become load-bearing and cannot be safely dismantled without everything collapsing. Springfield is full of performed selves. Homer performs competence at work that he does not possess. Marge performs contentment that she frequently does not feel. Ned performs serenity that, as the hurricane episode reveals, covers something very different. Patty and Selma perform indifference to the world that masks, beneath the cigarette smoke and flat affect, a fierce and loyal love for their sister and a genuine investment in the ongoing project of their own lives that they simply choose not to display. But Krusty's performed self is different from all of these because Krusty's performed self became an institution, became a media brand, became something that exists independently of its originator and makes demands of him that are structural rather than social. Ned's performance can fail, has failed, and Ned went to a facility and had a breakdown and came back, and the town accommodated the failure because Ned's performance was personal rather than institutional. Krusty's performance cannot fail because Krusty's performance is a television show with contracts and merchandise deals and the childhood memories of multiple generations of Springfield's population. The institution will not let Herschel be Herschel. The institution requires Krusty, and Krusty, after decades, may not know how to exist outside the requirements of the institution. This is the horror that the show has been quietly building in Krusty's appearances across 36 seasons. Not the horror of a man who became something he did not want to be, though that is part of it. The horror of a man who cannot remember what he wanted to be before the performance started, who has lived inside the character for so long that the character is all there is, who occasionally gestures toward Herschel, but can only ever produce Krusty, because Krusty is the only self that has been maintained and practiced and kept alive through continuous use. Bart loves Krusty. Bart would be devastated if Krusty disappeared. And Krusty, who is aware of this love and finds it simultaneously moving and suffocating, keeps going, keeps performing, keeps being Krusty because the alternative, being Herschel in front of a child who needs Krusty, is a cruelty he cannot bring himself to inflict. The performance, in the end, is an act of love. Exhausted, cynical, structurally trapped, maintained by contract and habit and the sheer institutional inertia of decades of entertainment production. But love, in the specific way that a performer who has given everything to a role and cannot stop giving continues to give because someone in the audience needs what only the performance can provide. Herschel Krustofsky is still in there somewhere. He showed up during the reconciliation with his father. He shows up in the rare episodes where the grease paint comes off and the man underneath is allowed to speak. He is recognizably a person, with a history and losses and genuine feeling and the specific texture of a life that did not go the way it was supposed to. But Krusty keeps coming back. The performance resumes, the horn squeaks, the children laugh. And Springfield's children grow up believing, the way Bart believes, that what they are seeing is real, because for them it is real, because the performed joy is the joy they have, because Herschel's exhaustion is invisible beneath the grease paint, and there is no reason to look for what the grease paint covers if what it shows you is funny enough to make you feel better for 22 minutes. That is what Krusty provides. That is what the institution of Krusty provides. 22 minutes of performed joy, delivered by a man who lost track of his own, in a town that has a very high ongoing demand for the thing. Number Section 9. The Ghost of Maud Flanders. Maud Flanders died in the year 2000. Season 11, Episode 14. She was killed by a t-shirt cannon at the Springfield Speedway. Homer, startled by the promotional projectiles being fired into the crowd, ducked at the critical moment, and the shirts that would have hit him hit Maud instead. She fell from the bleachers. She did not recover. Ned Flanders came home to 2 sons and a house next door to the family, whose father's reflexive self-preservation had, in some immediate sense, made him a widower. The show treated Maud's death as a significant event, not as a temporary plot point, not as a shock to be resolved by the next episode, but as a genuine structural change in the Flanders family's reality. Ned grieved. He grieved in the specific and painful way that the show occasionally allows its characters to grieve, without the reset button, without the comfortable comedy of the week, erasing the loss, with something approximating real consequence carrying forward into subsequent episodes. He tried to date again. He struggled. He encountered a series of women who were either wrong in simple ways, or wrong in complicated ways, or simply not Maud, which was ultimately the most insurmountable problem. He raised Rod and Todd alone, in the specific and slightly bewildering way that a devout single father in Springfield raises children, with rules and love and Bible verses and an interior life that the show has always treated as more complex than its comedic presentation suggests. Maud's absence reshaped Ned's character in ways that persist. The hurricane breakdown, the institutionalization, the revelation of the behavioral conditioning, all of this happens after Maud's death. Whether the connection is causal, whether losing Maud removed a stabilizing factor that the conditioning had depended on, is never explicitly stated, but the temporal relationship is real. Ned was one person with Maud and a noticeably more fragile person without her. But here is the thing about Maud Flanders that the show has never fully examined, and that becomes more interesting the more carefully you look at it. Maud did not disappear when she died. She left something behind. She left a negative space in the structure of Springfield's reality that has been occupied, ever since, by her absence in ways that are stranger than simple grief can explain. The show has brought Maud back, not as a living character, but in visions, in Ned's dreams, in moments that the show frames as grief hallucination or spiritual encounter depending on your interpretive preference. These returns are brief and carefully managed, almost always resolved before they can be examined too closely. But they have a texture that is different from standard dream sequence material. They feel, inside the show's visual and emotional language, like something more specific than wish fulfillment. The Simpsons operates in a universe where God exists. This has been established unambiguously. Homer has met God twice. Conversations have been had. Divine intervention has occurred in a form that the show treats as real rather than metaphorical. The universe of Springfield is one in which the supernatural is, while unusual, entirely plausible as a matter of observable fact. In a universe where God exists and can be encountered in a vision by Homer Simpson, who is not particularly righteous by any standard measure, the question of what happens to Maud Flanders, one of the more sincerely devout characters in Springfield's history, after her death is not a trivial one. The show has never answered it, but it has gestured toward it in ways that leave the question open. What Ned experiences in the moments when Maud seems to return, whether those experiences are neurological artifacts of grief or genuine contact with something beyond Springfield's mortal plane, cannot be determined from the evidence the show provides. The show was very careful, when it brought Maud back in these moments, to maintain exactly the level of ambiguity that prevents either interpretation from becoming definitive. But the pattern of how Maud's presence functions in the narrative, even after her death, is worth examining carefully. Maud in life was a moral anchor. She was the character in the Flanders household whose faith was practiced rather than just proclaimed. Ned was the visible believer, the one who quoted scripture and organized church events and made his faith known to the neighborhood. But Maud was, in the episodes that gave her enough screen time to show her character, the one whose faith translated into genuine kindness in the specific daily texture of her life. She was warm in a way that went beyond Ned's programmed niceness. She was present in a way that suggested an interior life of real depth. And after her death, that moral anchor function did not simply disappear. It redistributed. It became a reference point in Ned's decision-making, a consideration that the show frequently depicts as Ned asking himself what Maud would have done or said or thought. She became, in practical terms, a participant in Ned's ongoing choices even in her absence. This is how Springfield works with its dead, or at least with the ones it cannot fully release. The dead do not simply stop being part of the community. They become part of the community's self-understanding, part of the reference framework against which the living measure their own choices. Maud is the standard against which Ned holds himself accountable. She is the specific flavor of kindness that the Flanders household aspired to and still aspires to, even without her physically present to model it. There is a darker reading of this. In a town with Springfield's particular relationship to collective denial and the management of uncomfortable truths, the dead have a function that the living cannot perform. The dead cannot be argued with. The dead cannot revise their positions, cannot be caught in inconsistencies, cannot turn out to be more complicated than their image suggested. The dead are fixed points, and Springfield, which so desperately needs fixed points to organize its reality around, treats certain of its dead as something close to institutional resources. Maud is one of these. She has become, in death, what she could not quite have become in life within the show's comedic framework. A moral reference point so stable that even the show's own resistance to stability cannot dislodge her. The children named their dog in her memory. Ned still speaks of her with a tenderness that the show has never really moved him past, not as a stuck grief, but as a living connection to something the world is smaller for having lost. The Flanders house next door to the Simpsons is still, in some meaningful sense, organized around her absence. And somewhere in Springfield, possibly in the universe where God can be met on a golf course and angels can intervene in municipal politics, something that was Maud Flanders may still have opinions about the neighborhood. The show will not confirm it. The show will never confirm it. But in a universe as porous as Springfield's, where the boundary between the living and the dead has been shown to be more permeable than in most zip codes, the question of whether Maud is genuinely gone or simply present in a form that requires a different kind of attention is a question that the show has left deliberately open. The t-shirt cannon was Homer's fault. Homer's reflexes removed Maud from Ned's life, and Homer, characteristically, did not fully process the weight of this. He felt bad. He tried to help. He failed to help in ways that were characteristic and occasionally catastrophic. And then the loop reset and Homer was Homer, and the power plant was still running and Ned was still next door, and the absence of Maud became part of Springfield's texture. But somewhere in that texture, in the specific hollow that her removal created, something persists. Something that influences Ned's choices without appearing on screen. Something that the show returns to when it wants to show us that Ned is still who he is despite everything, still trying to be the kind of person Maud would recognize as worthy of the life they built together. In the economy of Springfield's moral landscape, that persistence is significant. The things that endure in Springfield against the town's own powerful capacity for erasure are the things that the town, at some level, needs to survive. The town needs Ned's decency to survive, even if it cannot reward it. And Ned's decency is, still, in part, anchored to someone who is not there anymore. Maud's ghost is not a supernatural theory, it is a social and moral one. The ghost is the ongoing influence of a life well lived on the people who were shaped by it. And Springfield, which has so little of that kind of influence to spare, holds on to it with the specific grip of something that knows it cannot afford to let go. Number Section 10. Springfield's underground economy and who really runs the town. Springfield has a mayor. His name is Quimby. Diamond Joe Quimby. He is transparently corrupt, broadly ineffective, apparently immune to electoral consequence, and somehow still in office after 36 years of scandals, policy failures, and public incidents of a character that would have ended the career of any real politician within the first term. Quimby is the nominal head of Springfield's government. He delivers speeches, he cuts ribbons, he appears at public events, he signs things. He is the official face of municipal authority in a town that has a very complicated relationship with authority of all kinds. But Quimby does not run Springfield. This is something the show has made clear through the accumulated evidence of 36 seasons without ever quite stating it as explicitly as the evidence warrants. Quimby is the front. He is the ribbon-cutting apparatus. He is the official face that the government of Springfield presents to the outside world and to its own citizens on occasions when a government face is required. The actual operations of Springfield, its budget allocations, its regulatory decisions, its infrastructure management, its zoning, its policing priorities, its public health policy, all of the mechanisms through which a municipal government actually shapes the daily life of its residents, these are not controlled by Quimby. They are controlled by the collection of private interests that have, over decades, positioned themselves inside Springfield's governmental architecture in ways that make their control structural rather than visible. Burns is the most obvious of these. Burns owns the power plant. The power plant supplies Springfield's electricity. Electricity is not a negotiable requirement for a modern town. Whoever controls the electricity supply has leverage over every other element of the town's functioning. That is so fundamental it barely needs to be exercised as leverage, because everyone already knows it is there. Burns does not need to threaten to turn off the power. The possibility that he could is enough. But Burns is not the only private interest with structural control over Springfield's reality. The show has, across its full run, documented an underground economy of influence that operates largely beneath the level of official municipal government and that is, in many ways, more effective than the official government at actually determining how the town functions. Moe's Tavern is one node in this economy. Moe Zislak is not a powerful man in any conventional sense. He is financially precarious, personally unhappy, and running a bar that maintains its customer base through loyalty and proximity rather than excellence. But Moe's Tavern is where information flows in Springfield. It is where Homer and his circle gather and talk and process the events of their lives. It is a social hub that does not appear on any organizational chart, but that functions as one of the town's primary information clearinghouses. Moe knows things. He has known things for 36 years. He knows who is drinking too much and what they talk about when they drink too much, and what those conversations reveal about the state of their finances, their marriages, their plans, their fears. He is one of the town's most consistent accidental intelligence gatherers, a man positioned at the intersection of vulnerability and social need who has decades of accumulated knowledge about Springfield's residents that he almost never makes use of in any strategic way. The reason Moe does not use this knowledge strategically is one of the show's quieter character arguments. Moe is fundamentally decent in ways that his surface presentation actively obscures. He is gruff, he is occasionally ethically flexible, he has a history that the show only hints at and that appears to involve some genuinely dark territory. But he does not exploit the confidences of his customers. He does not sell what he knows. He holds it, adds it to the general texture of his understanding of the town, and largely keeps it to himself. This restraint is not weakness. In Springfield's underground economy, where information is one of the most valuable currencies, Moe's choice not to monetize what he knows is a form of institutional integrity that the official government does not match. Now let us look at the mob, because Springfield has one, and the show has been surprisingly consistent about what it looks like and how it operates. Fat Tony. He appears across multiple seasons. He runs organized crime in Springfield with the specific style of a man who has watched too many gangster films and decided to take them seriously as career guidance. He has associates, he has operations, he has the specific relationship with municipal government that organized crime historically maintains with municipal government, which is to say a relationship built on mutual non-interference and the occasional mutually beneficial arrangement. Springfield's police department, under Wiggum's leadership, is too incompetent to effectively prosecute Fat Tony's operations, and possibly too compromised to try very hard. The show does not definitively establish whether Wiggum's failures in organized crime prosecution are the result of pure incompetence or something more structural, but the outcome is the same either way. Fat Tony operates. Springfield's official law enforcement does not significantly impede him. What Fat Tony provides that Springfield's official economy does not, cannot, or will not provide, is what organized crime always provides in its specific ecological niche. It fills the gaps. It supplies things that are in demand but officially unavailable. It offers a certain kind of dispute resolution that official channels are too slow, too expensive, or too public to provide. It creates employment of a kind that asks few questions about previous records or formal credentials. In a town whose official economy is as narrow as Springfield's, where the power plant provides the majority of stable employment and everything else is either retail or service in the shadow of that dominant employer, the underground economy fills a function that the official economy is not designed to fill. It is not the tumor. It is the symptom of a legitimate economic insufficiency. This is not an apologia for Fat Tony. It is an observation about how economies actually function in towns that are, as Springfield clearly is, structured around a single dominant employer who has no interest in diversifying the town's economic base because a more diversified economy would be harder to control. Burns's monopoly over Springfield's economic life is, in this reading, the precondition for the underground economy. A town with genuine economic diversity does not need Fat Tony. A town where the options are the power plant, the Quickie Mart, or whatever informal arrangement is available, needs something that operates outside the official channels because the official channels are too narrowly constructed to accommodate the full range of economic activity that a community actually generates. And somewhere in the space between Burns's official economy, Quimby's official government, Fat Tony's unofficial economy, and the enormous repository of institutional knowledge held by people like Mo and Patty and Selma and the nurses at Springfield General. The actual Springfield functions, not through any single power center, but through a complicated, overlapping, occasionally contradictory network of competing interests that have achieved a kind of unstable equilibrium. The equilibrium is unstable because the interests are not aligned. Burns wants control. Fat Tony wants profit. Quimby wants survival. The DMV wants its records to remain relevant. Mo wants his bar to keep operating. And the Simpsons family, at the center of this network in their specific way that the show has always suggested without quite stating, wants to get through the week without losing the house or each other. These interests do not cohere. They do not produce, as a system, outcomes that serve anyone very well. They produce Springfield, which is the specific outcome of all these competing interests operating simultaneously in a closed system with inadequate regulatory oversight and a population that has been, for decades, kept just distracted enough by its own symptoms to avoid organizing effectively around any of them. This is the underground economy of Springfield. Not just the financial underground, not just Fat Tony's operations, but the entire network of informal influence and institutional knowledge and private interest that shapes the town's reality below the level of official governance. Below Mayor Quimby's ribbon cutting, below Chief Wiggum's failing investigations, below Burns's official corporate communications. The real Springfield is run by its accumulated informal arrangements, by the deals made in Mo's back room and the records maintained in the DMV and the knowledge held by the hospital staff and the operations of an organized crime figure who fills the economic gaps that the official economy leaves empty. It is exactly the kind of town that anyone who has ever lived in a real small town will find familiar. Because real small towns run this way. Real small towns are, beneath the official institutional structure, networks of informal arrangement and accumulated knowledge and private interest and long memory that shape the community's actual functioning in ways that no town council agenda ever quite captures. Springfield just does it with more radiation and a three-eyed fish. Number. Section 11. The Treehouse of Horror Canon Problem. Every October, The Simpsons does something genuinely unusual for a long-running network television series. It kills its main characters, sometimes multiple times in a single episode. It depicts the end of the world. It involves the family in scenarios of supernatural horror that are incompatible with the basic premise of the show. It does all of this with obvious relish and apparent creative freedom that the regular episodes cannot match. The Treehouse of Horror anthologies are, by any formal measure, the show's most consistently inventive episodes. They are also, officially, non-canonical. The deaths and transformations and cosmic horrors contained within them do not carry forward. The show never references them in subsequent regular episodes. They exist in a formally sealed space, a narrative quarantine zone where normal rules are suspended and anything can happen without consequence. This is the official position: non-canonical, sealed, no consequences. And yet, the Treehouse of Horror episodes have been accumulating for 36 years. There are more than 36 of them, since many of them were produced annually and some years had more than one. They constitute a body of work nearly as large as several regular seasons of the show. They have been written by the same writers, animated by the same studio, voiced by the same cast, produced under the same institutional structure as every other episode. They live in the same cultural space as the canonical episodes. Fans reference them. Critics analyze them. They are part of what The Simpsons is, not as an external supplement to the show, but as an integral component of its identity. The question the official non-canonical designation is designed to foreclose is the one that becomes increasingly difficult to foreclose as the body of Treehouse content grows. If the characters die in canonical episodes, the show must either address the death or use its standard reset mechanism to erase it. But if the characters die in Treehouse episodes, the show can take credit for the creative boldness of depicting the death while maintaining complete deniability about its narrative consequences. This is a very useful arrangement, and the show has been using it for 36 seasons to explore versions of Springfield and the Simpson family that the canonical episodes cannot accommodate. But here is the theory that the Treehouse canon problem produces when you sit with it long enough. The Treehouse episodes are not non-canonical. They are a different kind of canonical. They reveal, through the specific content of what the show chooses to explore when freed from the constraints of its regular premise, what Springfield and the Simpson family look like when the rules are lifted, which is to say they reveal the underlying structure that the rules of the regular show are designed to manage and contain. The Treehouse episodes keep returning to certain themes. Death, obviously, but not just death as comedy. Death as the specific horror of a town where death does not quite work the way it should. The supernatural intervention in Springfield's reality. The revelation of evil that was always present beneath the surface of familiar locations and institutions. The discovery that the people and places the family trusts are something much darker than their everyday presentation suggests. These themes are not random. They are not the themes of creators who are simply trying to scare people. They are the themes of a creative staff who have spent their careers working on a show that they understand, at some level, to be a horror story dressed as a sitcom. The Treehouse episodes are where the horror shows itself directly, freed from the requirement that it be legible as comedy. Consider the specific character of the terrors the Treehouse episodes choose. Burns as a vampire. The school as a place of genuine danger. The familiar domestic environment as the location of profound and lethal threat. These are not arbitrary choices. They are the regular show's subtext made literal. Burns as a vampire is the Treehouse version of Burns, the billionaire who keeps himself alive through weekly medical treatments involving radiation, and has been doing so for over a century. The supernatural metaphor maps directly onto the canonical reality. The vampire's power over his community, his longevity, his dependence on a sustaining substance that he extracts from the people around him, these are not Treehouse inventions. They are Treehouse literalizations of what the canonical Burns already is. The school as a location of horror is the Treehouse version of Springfield Elementary as a chronically underfunded institution that exists in the perpetual shadow of a billionaire who stole its oil well budget and whose environmental contamination has almost certainly affected the cognitive development of every child educated within it. The horror of the Treehouse School episodes is not invented. It is distilled from the horror that the canonical school episodes depict but cannot name directly. The domestic space as the location of threat is the Treehouse version of Evergreen Terrace, sitting downwind of a nuclear power plant with 342 safety violations, drinking water that flows through the same table that receives the plant's waste discharge, housing a family whose physical characteristics reflect exactly the kind of biological modification that chronic low-level radiation exposure produces in living organisms. The Treehouse episodes do not escape the show's reality. They describe it. They are the version of Springfield's story that can be told when the requirement to present the horror as comedy has been lifted, and what they reveal, across 36 years of annual terror anthologies, is that the horror is not separate from the show. The horror is the show. The horror is Springfield. The horror is what The Simpsons has been depicting all along, wrapped in the specific kind of comedy that makes it comfortable enough to watch every Sunday evening at 8 o'clock. And there is one more dimension of the Treehouse canon problem that is worth examining. The question of what the non-canonical designation does to the characters who experience the Treehouse events. Within the Treehouse episodes, the family members die. They suffer. They are transformed into things they are not. They experience versions of their lives that are darker and stranger and more explicitly terrible than the canonical episodes allow. And then the Treehouse ends and the canonical reality resumes, and they are, officially, unchanged. But are they unchanged? The show says yes, definitively. These episodes do not count. But the characters who experience them, the Homer and Marge and Bart and Lisa and Maggie of the canonical episodes, carry with them the formal narrative history of everything that has happened to them, including the things that officially did not happen. Under the coma theory, this becomes particularly interesting. If the canonical episodes are Homer's dream, if the regular show since April 1993 is the interior experience of an unconscious man, then the Treehouse episodes are Homer's nightmares. They are the moments when the dream turns dark, when the dreaming mind produces images it cannot entirely control, when the protective fiction of the family together and safe and funny dissolves into something more honest about the terror that underlies the dream. A dreaming mind produces nightmares alongside pleasant dreams. The nightmares are not less real than the pleasant dreams. They are not non-canonical. They are the same mind doing different things in the same session of unconsciousness. The nightmares and the dreams together constitute the full record of what the dreaming mind contains. If Homer is dreaming, the treehouse episodes are where his unconscious mind tells the truth about what it is afraid of. Burns as a vampire is what Homer's brain produces when it allows itself to think clearly about the man who employs him. The family dying in various elaborate ways is what Homer's brain produces when the protective fiction of everyone being safe and together weakens just enough to let the underlying fear through. The treehouse episodes are non-canonical in the sense that the show cannot integrate their events into its ongoing narrative. But they are deeply canonical in the sense that they come from the same source as everything else, the same creative mind, the same unconscious structure, the same specific fears and dark perceptions that the show is otherwise committed to managing through comedy. The horror anthology is not the holiday break from the real show. The horror anthology is the real show allowed to be itself for one episode a year. And when the treehouse ends and the canonical reality resumes, Springfield goes back to being funny. The horror returns to the subtext. The family returns to the couch. And the next October, the horror surfaces again. Because it is always there. Because Springfield has always been what the treehouse episodes show it to be. The non-canonical designation does not protect the regular show from the treehouse's revelations. It just provides official deniability. And official deniability, as we have established across every other dimension of Springfield's reality, is what the town runs on. Number section 12. The final loop, or why Springfield can never end. We have been in Springfield for a long time now. We have walked its streets and sat in its institutions and looked at its people carefully enough to see the patterns beneath the individual episodes, the accumulated logic that no single joke or plot or character moment fully captures, but that the whole 36-year sequence makes unmistakably visible. We have followed the radiation from the power plant into the water table, and from the water table into the biology of the population, and from the biology of the population into the specific cognitive and physical characteristics of Springfield's residents. We have traced Homer's possible coma from the vending machine in 1993 through every episode that followed, reading each one as a love letter from an unconscious mind to the family it cannot reach. We have reopened the Burns shooting case and found that the official answer has more problems than the investigation ever acknowledged. We have looked at the medical establishment and the underground economy and the DMV records and the couch gag cosmology and the ghost of Maud Flanders and the tragedy of Krusty and the mirror of Shelbyville and the darkness of the time. Treehouse, that is also the darkness of the canonical show. And all of it, every theory and every piece of evidence and every pattern and every thread leads back to the same place. The house on Evergreen Terrace, the family on the couch, the fixed point around which 36 seasons of impossible continuity have been orbiting. The question that has been implicit in everything we have discussed is the question the show itself has never fully answered. Why does Springfield continue? Not as a production question, though that question has its own interesting answer. As a narrative question, why does the loop keep running? Why does nothing change? Why do the consequences not stick, and the catastrophes not alter the fundamental configuration, and the people not age, and the town not move toward any recognizable conclusion? We have proposed several answers across this long night in Springfield. The radiation theory says the town continues because the population is too cognitively compromised to break the cycle, because the damage to Springfield's collective critical thinking faculty has been so thorough and so sustained that the capacity to see the loop and decide to end it has been removed from the available options. The coma theory says the town continues because a dreaming mind does not conclude. It loops, it returns. It generates the next episode from the same materials as the previous one, because those are the only materials available to a mind that went unconscious in 1993 and has been running on memory and ambient stimulus ever since. The Skinner theory says the town continues because its residents have built a social contract around the maintenance of comfortable fictions and the expulsion of inconvenient truths. And that contract is enforced with the specific ruthlessness of a community that knows, at some pre-conscious level, that the truth would be too expensive to live with. All of these answers are true. None of them is the complete answer. The complete answer is the one that the show has been gesturing toward across its entire run without ever quite arriving at, the one that requires stepping outside the frame and seeing Springfield from the perspective of the people watching. Springfield continues because we need it to. This sounds like the kind of sentimental conclusion that dissolves under examination, but it holds up better than it should. The Simpsons has been running for 36 years. It has not been running because of Burns's money, or the radiation's effect on critical thinking, or Homer's coma. It has been running because of the aggregate decision of a viewing audience to keep showing up. Week after week, season after season, episode after episode, the audience has renewed the contract that keeps Springfield in existence. The audience has been, for 36 years, the force that prevents the loop from concluding. And the audience has done this not despite knowing that Springfield is a closed loop, but in some sense because of it. The show's critics, the people who argue that The Simpsons should have ended years ago, that the golden age is long past, that the current episodes are pale shadows of what the show once was, are not wrong about any of the empirical claims they make. The show has declined in specific, measurable ways. The plots are more arbitrary. The character work is thinner. The emotional stakes are lower. And people keep watching. Because the characters are there. Because Homer is on the couch, and Marge is in the kitchen, and Bart is in the treehouse, and Lisa is playing her saxophone, and Maggie is sucking on her pacifier in the specific and irreplaceable way that Maggie does. Because Evergreen Terrace still looks like it did in 1989, and the power plant cooling towers still dominate the skyline, and the Quickie Mart is still on the corner, and Springfield is still there, exactly as it was, waiting. The loop continues, because the loop is what we built in place of something we did not want to lose. What we did not want to lose is complicated and different for every person who has ever watched the show. For some people, it is childhood. The specific Saturday morning texture of watching cartoons before anyone else is awake, the serial and the cartoon logic, and the sense that the world is funny and safe. The Simpsons is not a Saturday morning cartoon, but it has, for generations of viewers, occupied a similar emotional space. The permanent Sunday night, the family gathering around the television, the familiar opening chords. For some people, it is a particular moment in their own life when the show was most alive, the seasons that spoke most directly to where they were, the episodes they can quote, the way other people quote scripture or song lyrics. The show as a shared cultural language, a way of recognizing other people who also grew up inside the same specific set of references. For some people, it is the family itself, Homer and Marge and Bart and Lisa and Maggie, as the idealized version of a family arrangement that the real world does not maintain as reliably as Evergreen Terrace does. The family that survives everything. The family that argues and fails and causes disasters and recovers and sits back down on the same couch week after week. The family that, whatever else happens, is still there. This last one is the one that connects to everything else we have discussed. The endurance of the Simpson family is the show's central emotional commitment. Everything else, the radiation and the coma and the shooting and the immortal billionaire and the underground economy and the non-canonical horror and the impossible geography, all of it exists in relationship to the family's continued existence as the primary narrative fact. The family survives. The loop continues. Springfield maintains its impossible, contaminated, frozen, beloved reality. And every theory we have examined, however dark its implications, ultimately orbits the same gravitational center. The house on Evergreen Terrace and the people inside it, and the astonishing, irrational, humanly recognizable fact that the most obvious thing about the place is how much the people who live there love each other, even through the radiation and the coma and the betrayals and the resets and the years and years of everything that should have broken what keeps not breaking. Homer Simpson is broken. He has been broken since before we met him, by a billionaire's grudge, and a father's silence, and a mother's forced absence, and a crayon in his brain, and decades of radiation, and the specific kind of fog that settles over a mind that has decided that seeing clearly is worse than not seeing. He is broken, and he is held together by something that has no name that does justice to it. By Marge's patience and Bart's energy, and Lisa's stubbornness and Maggie's still watchful presence, and the specific gravity of 742 Evergreen Terrace pulling everything back toward it. Marge Simpson is exhausted. She has been exhausted since before we met her, by the work of holding a family together in a contaminated town, with a husband who is brilliant and broken in equal measure, and children who each need something different from her, and parents-in-law who are each dealing with their own unprocessed catastrophes, and a hair that she has maintained in the same shape for 36 years through what must be truly extraordinary commitment. She is exhausted, and she stays. And she chooses every episode to stay, and the staying is the bravest thing the show depicts, quieter than any of the adventures and more durably consequential than any of the crises. Bart Simpson is afraid. He is afraid of being ordinary, afraid of being dismissed, afraid of being the kid who never amounted to anything, afraid of disappointing the family that he torments with the specific creativity of someone who needs to know that the family will not leave, even when he makes it difficult to stay. He is afraid, and he is funny, and he is 10 years old, and has been 10 years old for 36 years, and somewhere inside that permanent 10, there is a child who would rather be told his family loves him than told anything else in the world. Lisa Simpson is lonely. She has always been lonely. She is lonely in the specific way that the most intelligent person in any room is lonely, which is the loneliness of seeing things that the room does not see, and knowing that seeing them does not make them visible to anyone else. She is lonely, and she is principled, and she is 8 years old, and she keeps getting up in the morning and picking up her saxophone and playing something that nobody else in Springfield is playing. And the music is real, even when nobody is listening. Maggie Simpson is waiting. She has always been waiting. She is waiting for the moment when the silence she has maintained with such strategic care becomes productive, when the intelligence she has hidden behind a pacifier and a carefully performed incompetence finds its moment to act. She is waiting, and she is watching, and she has been watching everything for 36 years, with enormous eyes that miss nothing, and a brain that files everything, and a patience that makes the people around her assume she is simply a baby, and, therefore, not a factor. She is always a factor. This is the family the show built. This is the family that has been sitting on that couch since the 17th of December, 1989. And that will presumably keep sitting on it for as long as we keep inviting them into our Sunday evenings, and our sick days, and our falling asleep to the television nights, and our I just want to watch something familiar afternoons. Springfield is a closed loop. Springfield is a contamination zone. Springfield is possibly the interior landscape of an unconscious man's mind. Springfield is what you get when an ancient and ruthless billionaire has decades to reshape a right. Springfield is the town that votes to maintain the fiction rather than acknowledge the truth. Springfield is everywhere and nowhere on any map. Springfield is the show that has been predicting the future by diagnosing the present since before most of its audience was born. And Springfield is home. Not despite all of that, because of all of that. Because home is not the clean and uncomplicated place. Home is the place that knows your damage and holds you anyway. The place that has seen everything you are capable of and has not yet locked the door. The place that is still there when you come back to it, imperfect and familiar, and yours in the specific way that nothing else quite is. The loop is not a prison. The loop is the shape of love. It goes out, and it comes back, and it goes out, and it comes back, and every time it comes back, it arrives at the same place, which is the family on the couch in the house at the end of the street in the town that should not exist and somehow, stubbornly, wonderfully does. The credits will roll, the episode will end, and the next one will start exactly where this one did, with the clouds parting and the music beginning, and the family making its separate ways home from the various corners of a town that is poisoned and frozen and impossible and beloved. Homer will fall through the front door, he will land on the couch, he will look at the television, and then he will look at his family, and there will be a moment, the same moment that has appeared in every episode across 36 years, where his face contains something that has no name but that every person who has ever watched this show recognizes, which is the specific, overwhelming relief of someone who has come home and found that everything he was afraid of losing is still there. The loop is not a prison. The loop is a man coming home and finding his family every single time he walks through the door. That is what Springfield is. That is what we built when we decided not to let it end. That is what will be there. The yellow family on the yellow couch, in the yellow house, on the yellow street, in the town that never changes and never quite stops mattering, in the loop that turns and always comes back to the same place. Home, Springfield will still be here when you come back. It always is. Number section 13. The principle and the mystery of institutional memory. There is a man in Springfield who has been running the same elementary school for 36 years. He eats cafeteria food every day. He lives with his mother. He enforces rules that nobody respects and maintains order that nobody would describe as orderly. He has a military background, a Vietnam veteran's specific form of institutional obedience, combined with the particular damage that combat produces in people who survive it while others do not. He has been there since the beginning, and he is still there now, and the school he runs has not meaningfully improved on any metric you might care to apply to it. His name is Seymour Skinner, except it is not. His name is Armin Tamzarian, and the fact that Springfield has legally required everyone to pretend otherwise is one of the most important things the show has ever revealed about how institutions maintain themselves in the absence of any legitimate basis for their authority. We touched on the Skinner-Tamzarian revelation earlier in this long night in Springfield, in the context of how the town's collective denial mechanism operates. But the full implications of what the episode reveals about Springfield's educational institution and about institutional authority in general deserve their own extended attention, because the episode is doing something considerably more sophisticated than it is usually given credit for. Springfield Elementary is a failing school. This is not a theory. This is the show's consistent and explicit depiction of the institution across 36 seasons. The building is in poor repair. The teachers are a mixed collection of the dedicated, the burned out, and the genuinely bizarre. The curriculum is inadequate. The funding is insufficient, partly because Burns stole the oil discovery money from beneath the school's grounds, and partly because Springfield's political establishment has no particular interest in investing in an educational institution whose primary product is a more intellectually capable population, which is precisely the kind of population that is most likely to start asking questions that the political establishment would rather not answer. The children of Springfield are educated, insofar as they are educated, in an environment that has been shaped by the same forces that shape everything else in Springfield: underfunding, political indifference, the specific cognitive effects of living in a contaminated environment, and the day-to-day administrative decisions of a man whose entire professional identity is built on a fabrication. Here is what it means that Springfield Elementary is run by a man who is not who he says he is. It means that the institutional authority of the school, such as it is, has been derived for 2 decades from a credential that belongs to someone else. Armin Tamzarian has been making decisions about the education of Springfield's children based on an identity that he assumed rather than earned. The military record, the educational background, the specific professional history that positioned him to be taken seriously as an administrator, none of it belonged to him. It belonged to Seymour Skinner, who was alive and existing somewhere else, who had not consented to have his identity borrowed for the purposes of running a failing elementary school in a town that would eventually vote to keep the fiction rather than address the truth. What does it mean for a school to be run on a false credential? In practical terms, for most of the school's daily operations, it probably means very little. Tamzarian clearly knows how to run a school in the specific sense that Springfield Elementary requires running. He shows up, he enforces the rules, he navigates the particular chaos of having Bart Simpson enrolled. He maintains the minimum institutional function required to keep the building classified as an educational institution rather than a very expensive daycare. But in structural terms, in the terms that matter for understanding what Springfield Elementary actually is and what it actually does for the children enrolled in it, the false credential matters enormously. Because a school run on a false credential is a school that cannot be held accountable for its failures in the standard institutional ways. The standard institutional mechanism for accountability in education runs through the credentials and records of its administrators. You failed the children of this community. The record shows that you were responsible. The credential that authorized your responsibility is real and traceable and forms the basis for the consequence. Tamzarian's credential is not real and is not traceable in the way required for that accountability mechanism to function. If Springfield Elementary failed its children over 2 decades of Tamzarian's administration, and by the show's own evidence it certainly did, the trail of responsibility leads to a man who, legally speaking, does not exist. Armin Tamzarian was declared, by judicial decree, to be Seymour Skinner. The actual Seymour Skinner was expelled from town and made legally irrelevant to the institution that bore his name and operated on his identity. The legal fiction does not just protect Tamzarian, it protects the institution. It protects everyone who allowed the institution to function inadequately for 2 decades without raising the question of whether the person running it had any legitimate basis for doing so. The decree that Tamzarian is Skinner does not just grant Tamzarian an identity, It retrospectively authorizes everything the institution did under that identity, including the failures. Springfield's children were educated in a school run by a man whose authority derived from a fiction. The town voted to keep the fiction. The judge made the fiction law. And the school is still open, still underperforming, still populated by children who deserve better, and still administered by Armin Tamzarian, who is legally Seymour Skinner, who is legally the legitimate authority over the educational futures of Springfield's next generation. The show treated this as a controversial creative choice. Critics argued it undermined the character of Skinner. The internet still argues about it. But the episode is not primarily about Skinner's character. It is about institutional authority and what happens to it when its legitimacy is revealed to be constructed rather than real. Every institution derives its authority from a founding claim. In schools, this claim runs through credentials, accreditation, the professional establishment that certifies the people who run them. In governments, it runs through democratic mandate, constitutional authority, the consent of the governed. In businesses, it runs through ownership, capital, the legal structure of the corporate entity. But all of these founding claims are, at some level, constructions. They are things that communities have agreed to treat as valid. They derive their force not from any intrinsic quality, but from the collective agreement to act as if they are valid. And what the Skinner episode reveals, with unusual clarity for a television sitcom, is what happens when a community is confronted with evidence that the founding claim of one of its institutions is false. In Springfield's case, the community does not dismantle the institution. It does not demand that the institution rebuild its authority on a legitimate basis. It votes to reauthorize the false claim. It makes the fiction law. It expels the evidence that the claim is false and criminalizes any future reference to the episode of verification. This is what institutions do when the alternative to maintaining the fiction is dismantling the institution. And Springfield's residents understand, even if they have not articulated it in these terms, that dismantling Springfield Elementary is not an option they are willing to consider. The school exists. Their children are in it. The building is there. The cafeteria is producing its daily output of questionable nutrition. The teachers are showing up. Armin Tamzarian is standing in the hallway telling Bart Simpson to stop running. If they dismantle the school because its administrator was lying about who he is, they have to rebuild it from scratch. They have to find someone legitimate to run it. They have to reopen every decision made under the false administration and determine which ones were valid and which were not. They have to do the enormous, expensive, disruptive work of making the institution honest. Or they can vote to make the lie true. To declare that the man who has been running the school is who the school needs him to be, regardless of whether he is that person in any verifiable sense. To continue. They vote to continue. Of course they do. Springfield always votes to continue. The loop is the only available option when ending the loop means confronting everything the loop was built to avoid. Armin Tamzarian goes back to the hallway. The school goes back to producing its outcomes. The children go back to being educated in the specific and limited way that Springfield Elementary has always educated them. And somewhere, on a train heading away from town, the real Seymour Skinner watches Springfield recede and understands, with the clarity of a man who survived a prisoner of war camp only to be expelled from his own life by judicial decree, that there is no coming back from the community's decision. The truth was in the room. Springfield looked at it, considered it, and chose the alternative. This is not unusual. The show has been arguing for 36 years how Springfield works. Perhaps how every community works. At the level where the institutional foundations are examined and found to be more contingent and more constructed than the institutions require their foundations to be. The difference between Springfield and other communities is that Springfield had a vote about it. Most communities manage this process less formally, through the slower mechanisms of collective forgetting and narrative revision. But the outcome is the same. The institution that matters continues on the basis of the agreement to maintain it, regardless of whether the basis of its authority survives examination. Armin Tamzarian is Principal Skinner. Judge Snyder said so. Springfield said so. The record has been adjusted, and the school is still there, and the children are still in it, and the morning bell still rings at 8:15, and nobody is required by law to remember otherwise. Number section 14. Apu and the Quickie Mart as Springfield's nervous system. At the corner of a street in Springfield, there is a convenience store. It is open at all hours. It has been open at all hours for 36 years. It stocks an inventory that ranges from the immediately necessary to the inexplicably strange, from the squishy machine whose flavors include colors that do not exist in standard electromagnetic wavelengths, to the hot dogs that rotate on their heated rollers long past any point where they represent a reasonable dietary choice. It is robbed regularly. The man behind the counter has been shot at more times than any statistical model of retail crime would predict for a single-unit convenience store in a medium-sized American city. And yet the Quickie Mart is still there, still open, still stocked, still staffed by Apu Naha Sapima Pedalon, who knows the name of every customer, their purchasing patterns, their dietary quirks, their approximate emotional state based on what they are buying at 11 o'clock on a Tuesday night. The Quickie Mart is Springfield's nervous system. This is not a metaphor. It is a structural description of what the store does in the town's information ecology. Every community has a place or places that function as information hubs, where the flow of people from different parts of the social structure crosses in a context that is informal enough to produce real exchange. The pub, the barbershop, the diner, the place where people go who are not particularly going together, who encounter each other not by appointment but by the coincidence of needing something at the same time, and who, in the course of the brief transaction of purchasing what they need, exchange the information that makes a community aware of itself. The Quickie Mart serves this function in Springfield with a reach that Moe's Tavern cannot match. Moe's is a self-selecting community, the people who drink there regularly, the Homers and the Barneys and the Loomies and the Larrys. The Quickie Mart serves everyone. It serves Burns when he sends Smithers for something. It serves the children buying candy after school. It serves the elderly buying the specific items that suggest lives of quiet routine. It serves people at their most domestic and their most impulsive and their most revealing. And behind the counter, Apu watches all of it with the specific attention of someone who has had, in another life and another country, considerably more education than his current position requires or his current customers suspect. Apu Nahasapi Mapedalon holds a doctorate. This is canonical. He holds a doctorate from the Calcutta Institute of Technology, where he graduated first in his class of 7 million students. He came to the United States for a master's degree from Springfield Heights Institute of Technology, a degree he completed and then could not convert into the professional career it was supposed to enable. He ended up at the Quickie Mart under an arrangement with its owner that the show depicts as increasingly complicated and occasionally exploitative. And then he stayed. The question the show does not quite ask, though it gestures toward it across multiple episodes, is why someone of Apu's documented intellectual capacity, with advanced degrees from genuinely impressive institutions and demonstrable commercial competence, and a work ethic that puts every other character in Springfield to shame, has spent his career running a convenience store in a town that has consistently undervalued everything he brings to it. The show's preferred answer is immigration bureaucracy, the specific obstacles that the American system places in front of people attempting to convert foreign credentials into professional legitimacy in this country. This is a real phenomenon. It is worth depicting. But it is not the complete answer, because Apu's situation involves more than just bureaucratic obstacles. It involves choices, his own choices and the choices of the systems around him that have shaped his trajectory in ways that the bureaucratic explanation alone does not fully capture. Apu stayed in Springfield. He had opportunities to leave. The show has depicted moments when departure was possible, when the specific gravity of the town did not seem entirely insurmountable, when a different choice was available. He did not make it. Part of the answer is family. He met Manjula. They have 8 children. The octuplets are a physical manifestation of Springfield's specific capacity to make the exceptional into the impractical. 8 children born simultaneously to a couple who were already embedded in Springfield's social and economic structure is a set of circumstances that makes departure exponentially harder with every passing year. But there is something else underneath the family answer, something the show has never quite named but that the Quickie Mart's structural role in Springfield makes visible. Apu is, despite everything, essential here in a way that he would not be elsewhere. In a city with genuine commercial diversity, with a functioning economy of scale and a full range of retail options, the Quickie Mart is a minor convenience. In Springfield, where the commercial infrastructure is as limited and as shaped by Burns's economic monopoly as everything else, the Quickie Mart is a critical service. It is the accessible point, the always open option, the place that exists in the gap between what the larger economy provides and what people actually need at 11 o'clock on a Tuesday night. Apu knows this. He has always known this. He is not running a convenience store out of a lack of options. He is running an essential community service, with the specific dedication of someone who takes the thing he does seriously, regardless of whether the world takes him seriously for doing it. He shows up before anyone is awake. He closes after everyone has gone to sleep. He maintains an operation that, in a different Springfield, a less medically and economically compromised Springfield, might look like a minor retail unit, but in this Springfield is one of the institutions that keeps the town's daily life functional. And he does it while holding a doctorate, while knowing that the intellectual life he was trained for is available somewhere, just not here, just not now, just not while the octuplets are in school, and Manjula is managing the complexities of their life together, and the Quickie Mart needs someone behind the counter who will actually show up. The tragedy and the dignity of Apu's situation are inseparable. The tragedy is the credential unused, the intellectual capacity deployed in service of slushy machines and lottery tickets. The dignity is the complete seriousness with which he serves the function he serves, the refusal to be diminished by a role that the world would diminish him for occupying. Springfield's nervous system is in the hands of a man who knows exactly what he is doing and why it matters and what it cost him to be doing it. That is more than can be said for most of Springfield's institutions. The Quickie Mart has been robbed hundreds of times across the series. Every robbery is resolved. Apu either thwarts the criminal, or survives the criminal, or the criminal is apprehended, and the store reopens. The store is always open. The store cannot close. Springfield needs it to be open. That reliability is Apu's specific contribution to Springfield's survival. Not the store's inventory, not the slushy machine. The fact that someone who does not have to keep showing up keeps showing up anyway. In the economy of what holds Springfield together, that counts for more than almost anything Burns has ever built. Number. Section 15. The recurring extras and what they remember. Springfield is full of people who do not have names. Or rather, Springfield is full of people who have names within the show's extended universe, who have been given names in the writer's room and in the fan community, and occasionally on screen in ways that the casual viewer would miss, but who exist in the visual texture of Springfield as recurring faces without consistent identities, as background characters who cycle through the scenes of the town's daily life without the kind of narrative definition that the principal cast receives. These are the people who make Springfield feel like a real place rather than a set. The man with the bushy mustache and the hat, the woman who appears at community meetings and seems to have opinions but is rarely given lines, the couple who are always slightly in the background of the town's public events, present at every crisis, never quite in the center of the frame. The show has a specific relationship with these characters that is worth examining carefully, because how Springfield treats its background population reveals something about what kind of world the show believes it is depicting. Real communities have background people. They have the regulars at the diner who have been ordering the same breakfast since before the current cook was born. They have the person who is always at the library when it opens and always among the last to leave. They have the faces that anchor the community's sense of itself as a continuing entity, the people whose presence says this place has been here for a long time and will be here after you are gone. Springfield's background characters serve this function. They populate the town meetings and the sporting events and the crises. They are part of the fabric of the community in ways that the principal characters, who are narratively extraordinary by definition, cannot be. They represent the ordinary in a show that is mostly about the extraordinary. But here is what the background characters know that the principal characters cannot know. They remember everything. The principal characters, as we have established through the radiation theory and the coma theory and the collective denial mechanism, operate in a state of managed amnesia. The catastrophes reset. The memories erase. The town votes to forget, and the principal characters, being embedded in the town's psychological structure at the deepest level, participate in the forgetting. Homer does not remember the dome. Marge does not consistently remember the crises that should have reshaped the family's relationship to Springfield. The Simpsons family is, by design, the family that lives in the present tense, perpetually. The background characters have no such protection. They do not have the narrative centrality that requires their memories to be managed for plot purposes. They are not the focus of any particular episode's forgetting mechanism. They are just there, in the background, accumulating episodes the way real community members accumulate years. If you could ask the man with the mustache what happened to Springfield, If you could get a line from the woman who attends every town meeting, they would presumably remember everything: the dome, the shootings, the various attempts to relocate, destroy, or fundamentally alter the town, the recurring crises that the principal characters cycle through and forget. The background of Springfield is, in this reading, the show's memory, the part of the community that holds what the principal characters cannot hold, that carries the accumulated experience of 36 seasons without the narrative convenience of the reset. This reading has an interesting implication for how to understand Springfield as a community. If the background characters are the memory and the principal characters are the perpetual present, then Springfield has a specific relationship to its own history that maps onto how all communities actually function. In real communities, the people most embedded in the narrative are often the least connected to institutional memory. The newcomer, the person whose story is being told, experiences the present with an immediacy that obscures the accumulated history that the longer-term residents carry. The history exists. It is held by the background, but it is not transmitted in ways that change the present-tense experience of the people in the foreground. Homer is always experiencing Springfield for the first time, in some sense, not because he literally does not remember, but because the show structures his relationship to Springfield as experiential and immediate rather than historical and cumulative. The coma reading deepens this. A dreaming brain generates its environment as present experience, not as accumulated history. The background characters are the history that the dreaming brain does not generate. They are the part of Springfield that exists outside the dream, that would continue if the dream stopped, that holds the accumulated record of what the town has been through. They are the most real thing in Springfield, in the sense that they are the part that functions independently of the dreaming mind's requirements. And they say almost nothing, because the dreaming mind does not know them well enough to give them many lines. Number. Section 16. What Burns actually wants. We have discussed Burns throughout this night as the architect of Springfield's contamination, the immortal billionaire whose weekly radiation treatments keep him alive against all biological logic, the man who drove Mona Simpson into exile and engineered Homer's cognitive limitations for the purpose of maintaining a compliant workforce. We have discussed what Burns does and how he does it. We have not yet discussed what Burns wants. This sounds like it should have an obvious answer. Burns wants money. Burns wants power. Burns wants control. These are the standard answers, and they are all true at the surface level, but they are not quite sufficient to explain the specific texture of how Burns operates, the particular choices he makes, and the particular investments he maintains, the aspects of his behavior that go beyond the rational self-interest of a man protecting a financial empire. Burns collects things. This is documented across many episodes. He has a personal collection of artworks, of historical artifacts, of biological specimens, of things that are simply old and valuable and irreplaceable. He has a stuffed animals room. He has a basement of oddities. He has, in the episode where he builds his giant disk to block out the sun, demonstrated a willingness to invest staggering resources in a project whose financial return is speculative at best, and whose primary function seems to be, at some level, the demonstration that he can. Burns is not motivated purely by accumulation for the sake of accumulation. He is motivated by something older and stranger than simple greed. He is motivated by the specific desire of a man who has been alive for over a century and who has spent that century watching everything he knows become history. Burns remembers things that are now history. He remembers them not as history but as personal experience. He knew people who are now textbook figures. He participated in events that are now documented in archives. He has watched technology advance from horse-drawn carriages to nuclear reactors, watched political systems rise and fall, watched cities grow and collapse and be rebuilt on their own foundations. He is old enough that the distance between his personal memory and the contemporary world is not a generational gap, it is geological. What Burns wants, underneath the money and the power and the control, is continuity. He wants the world to continue being a place where Burns remains a relevant category, where his specific form of power, the accumulated wealth of centuries, and the institutional infrastructure built to protect it, continues to function, where the systems he has built to keep himself alive and keep his interests protected continue to be the systems that organize the community around him. His cruelty is in service of this continuity. His refusal to fix the power plant's safety violations is not sadism. It is the specific form of risk calculation that makes sense for someone who has been alive long enough to understand that accountability is a vulnerability. Admitting the plant is dangerous means opening the door to consequences, and consequences have a momentum that is difficult to control once they start moving. His pursuit of Mona Simpson across decades was not about her specifically. It was about the precedent. A woman destroyed something he built. She was not punished in proportion to the damage, she escaped. And in Burns's world, the world of someone who has maintained power for over a century, unpunished challenges to power are not minor incidents. They are structural vulnerabilities. They are the kind of precedent that, if allowed to stand, invites more challenges. The pursuit of Mona was Burns maintaining the deterrent, ensuring that the cost of acting against him remained high enough to prevent others from calculating that the risk was worth it. And Homer's continued employment, as we discussed, is the specific genius of Burns's strategy. Homer is not just an incompetent safety inspector. Homer is the human proof that Burns's system cannot be disrupted from within. The man who should be the mechanism of internal accountability has been rendered incapable of performing that function. Burns put the fox in the henhouse and then made the fox too confused to remember that he was a fox. But here's the dimension of Burns's desire that the show has been building toward without quite arriving at, the dimension that connects his immortality treatment and his century of accumulated power and his specific choices about Springfield to something that goes beyond rational self-interest. Burns is afraid of what happens when he is gone, not personally afraid of death in the way that most people are afraid of death. Burns has made his peace with the biological reality of his own mortality in the specific way that someone does who has been managing his own death for over a century through weekly radiation treatments. He knows he can be kept alive. He has built the infrastructure to keep himself alive. He has done this well enough that the infrastructure's continuation is the primary existential threat he faces, rather than any individual illness or injury. But Burns is afraid of something harder to manage than his own death. He is afraid of the world after Burns. Afraid of what Springfield becomes when the power plant is no longer his. When the systems he built to protect his interests are no longer organized around those interests. When the infrastructure of his century-long hold on this community is disbanded and repurposed, and the specific form of order he has imposed is replaced by something he did not design. He is afraid because he knows what his empire was built on. He knows about the 342 violations. He knows about the three-eyed fish. He knows about what the plant has done to the population that lives downwind of it. He knows about Mona Simpson's biological weapons facility, which is still the most under-examined piece of Burns's history in Springfield's fan community. He knows where all the bodies are, in the literal sense suggested by those human skeletons in the basement that the show mentioned once and never mentioned again. When Burns is gone, someone will find out. Someone will look at what was built here and they will look at the records, the real records, not the managed institutional memory of Springfield's collective denial, but the actual biological and environmental and historical record of what this facility did to this town. And that person will understand something that Burns has spent a century ensuring remains ununderstood. Burns cannot die while any of that record exists in accessible form. His immortality is not a personal vanity. It is an institutional necessity. While Burns is alive, the records remain under management. While Burns controls the infrastructure, the accountability remains deferred. While the treatments continue and Smithers manages the schedule and the plant keeps running and Homer keeps failing upward in Sector 7G, the reckoning that Springfield's history demands remains postponable. He is not too expensive to die. He is too dangerous to die. The accumulated liability of a century of deliberate environmental destruction, covered up through institutional capture and collective denial, and the systematic rendering of the local population cognitively incapable of demanding better, that liability does not expire when Burns expires. It becomes accessible. It becomes the subject of investigations that Burns can no longer manage. It becomes, potentially, the thing that finally changes Springfield in the ways that Springfield has been collectively refusing to change. Burns is holding the dam. The dam is made of his continued existence. And on the other side of the dam is a century of everything Burns did to Springfield that Springfield has been choosing not to see. He does not want immortality for himself. He wants it for the dam. And Smithers, who knows all of this, who manages the schedule that keeps the dam intact, who is the single most consequential person in Springfield's history, in the specific sense that his organizational competence is the mechanism by which a century of liability remains deferred, is not devoted to Burns out of love, though the show has depicted that devotion as having love in it. He is devoted because he understands the alternative, and the alternative is not just Burns dying. The alternative is the dam breaking. Smithers carries Springfield's history. Burns's continued existence is Smithers's specific form of carrying it. And every Tuesday, or whenever the treatment schedule runs, Smithers ensures that the man he works for gets to the appointment, and the appointment extends the management of things that have been managed for a very long time, and Springfield continues. And Homer goes to work the next morning, past the cooling towers, through the security gate, to his workstation in Sector 7G, where he will fall asleep next to a control panel that is, technically speaking, keeping the whole thing running. Number Section 17. The Mathematics of Springfield's Impossible Timeline. The Simpsons debuted on the 17th of December, 1989. On that date, Homer Simpson was approximately 36 years old, which would place his birth around 1953. Marge was approximately 34, born around 1955. Bart was 10, born around 1979. Lisa was 8, born around 1981. Maggie was 1 year old, born around 1988. These numbers, which the show established and then immediately began to undermine, create an arithmetic that becomes more impossible with every passing year of the show's production. In 1989, the math worked. In 2025, Homer would need to be 72 years old for the numbers to hold. Bart would need to be 46, Lisa would need to be 44, and Maggie, who has been 1 year old since the show began, would be 36. The show does not depict any of this. The show depicts a family that looks exactly as it did in 1989, living in a present that is undeniably contemporary, with smartphones and streaming services and cultural references to things that happened in the 2010s and 2020s. The characters are temporally unmoored, experiencing the present without aging into it. This is the floating timeline, and we have discussed it as a general phenomenon. But the specific mathematics of how much time has passed and what that means for the characters creates an increasingly surreal arithmetic that deserves its own analysis. Consider what Homer's backstory requires as of 2025. If Homer is still 36, he was born in 1989. His high school years were in the mid-2000s. His parents' courtship happened in the late 1970s, early 1980s. But those parents were in the same cultural moment as Homer himself, in terms of how the show draws them, which requires either that Grandpa Abe was an unusually old father, or that the timeline has been running multiple impossible overlapping versions of itself simultaneously. The show has addressed this explicitly through the flashback revision mechanism. When it needs Homer's high school years to exist in a specific cultural context for a given episode's joke, it places them in the decade that makes the joke work, regardless of what previous episodes established about when Homer was young. His origin story has been told 4 times, in 4 different decades, with 4 different cultural backdrops. The standard explanation: floating timeline, cartoon logic, don't think about it too hard. The theory that makes the arithmetic more interesting rather than simply dismissing it. The timeline is not floating. The timeline has been rewritten multiple times by multiple agents for different reasons with different degrees of intentionality. Under the radiation theory, the rewriting of the timeline is the population's cognitive response to the impossibility of maintaining a coherent linear narrative under conditions of chronic neurological damage. The brain cannot maintain a consistent timeline when its memory function is compromised, so the timeline shifts. The backstory reshapes itself to fit the current present. The past is whatever story the damaged brain can assemble from the fragments available in the moment of telling. Under the coma theory, the timeline is rewritten because the dreaming mind does not have a stable relationship with linear time. Dreams do not respect chronology. A dreaming brain can place the same characters in different decades in different dream episodes without any awareness of the inconsistency, because the dream's internal logic is not the logic of calendars and arithmetic. The dream's internal logic is the logic of emotional resonance and narrative need. Under the collective denial theory, the timeline is rewritten because Springfield does not need a consistent past. Springfield needs a past that supports the present that the community has agreed to inhabit. A consistent linear past would create accountability. It would establish that certain things happened in a certain order and that the consequences of those things should be traceable. Springfield's management of its own history is precisely about preventing that kind of traceability. And under the Burns theory, the timeline is rewritten because Burns has been in this town for over a century and has had the resources and the institutional influence to shape its narrative of itself in whatever direction serves his purposes. A town that doesn't know when its own history happened is a town that cannot file a class action lawsuit with a coherent timeline. All four theories converge on the same mechanism but for different reasons. The timeline shifts because it needs to. Because the thing that would be lost if the timeline were stable, accountability, coherent memory, the specific weight of time actually passing, is the thing that Springfield most urgently needs not to have. And the audience, watching this happen, has made its peace with the floating timeline, has accepted the arithmetic impossibility as an aesthetic convention, has agreed to pretend that Homer is still 36, that Bart is still 10, that the children are still the children, that the show is still the show. We made the same deal Springfield makes at every town meeting. We voted to maintain the fiction because the fiction is better than the alternative. The alternative is that the Simpsons are old. That Bart is a middle-aged man with children of his own and a mortgage, and the specific sadness of a person who peaked as a 10-year-old and has been coasting on the memory of that peak for 3 decades. The alternative is that Homer retired and Marge has an empty nest and Lisa is somewhere else entirely, doing something that Springfield would not understand or value. The alternative is that the show ended. We won't let it end. We've never let it end. We keep watching, keep accepting the arithmetic, keep agreeing that the family on the screen is the family we remember from childhood, regardless of what the calendar says, regardless of the growing gap between when the show began and when we are watching. The floating timeline is our collective act of love for something we do not want to lose. Springfield's amnesia is not just the town's, it is ours. Section 18. The second star to the left of Springfield. There is one more mystery. The one that nobody talks about because it is not a mystery about the show's content. It is a mystery about the show's effect. The Simpsons has been on television for 36 years. In that time, it has been watched by more cumulative hours of human attention than almost any other single piece of media in the history of the medium. It has been translated into dozens of languages. It has been broadcast on every inhabited continent. It has been watched by people who were children when it started and who are now middle-aged, by the children of those people, and in some cases by the grandchildren of the first generation of viewers. It has been a constant in an entertainment landscape that has changed beyond recognition in the time since the show began, in a world that looks almost nothing like the world of the 17th of December, 1989. The Simpsons has been there, every year, every season, the same family, the same couch, the same house at the end of the same street. The mystery is not about what The Simpsons has done to Springfield. The mystery is about what The Simpsons has done to us, to the people who grew up watching it, to the people who are still watching it, to the people who quote it without knowing they are quoting it, who use its language as their own language, who find in its specific lexicon of reference and absurdity the shared vocabulary of a generation or 2 or 3. The show entered the culture at a specific moment and at a specific angle, and it went in deep. It went in the way that things go in when they get there early enough that the audience has not yet built the critical defenses that would keep it at a safe emotional distance. Children who watched it in 1989 were watching before they fully understood what satire was, before they had the conceptual framework to see the nuclear power plant as a political object, or Burns as a structural critique of wealth concentration, or Springfield's collective amnesia as a diagnosis of how communities actually manage uncomfortable truths. They just watched, they laughed, they absorbed, and then they grew up, and the show was still there. And the things they had absorbed at 8 years old and 12 years old and 15 years old had been working in them all that time, shaping how they understood America and family and power and the specific comedy of people trying to get through the week without everything falling apart. The show had been running below the threshold of conscious analysis for years before they were old enough to analyze it. This is why the show's cultural influence is so disproportionate to any single episode's objective quality. The show is embedded too deep for the quality of individual episodes to be the relevant variable. The relevant variable is how long it has been there, how early it arrived, how many formative years of how many lives it was present during. And what the show put there, in all those years of all those people's formative experience, is a very specific model of how the world works. A model in which institutions fail, in which the powerful exploit the powerless with the specific confidence of people who have built systems to make that exploitation structural and therefore invisible, in which the mechanisms of collective denial operate continuously and efficiently, in which love persists anyway, in the family and in the community, not because the systems reward it, but because it is the one thing the systems cannot fully commodify. The show taught a generation or more to see power the way it actually operates, not through dramatic individual villainy, but through the accumulated institutional weight of arrangements designed to benefit the already powerful at the expense of the already powerless. It taught this through comedy, through the specific comedy of a cartoon family in a contaminated town that runs on the fiction that everything is fine. And then it kept running, and the people it taught grew up and saw those things in the real world, saw the nuclear power plants with their cracked cooling towers, saw the ancient billionaires sustained by the infrastructure of their own wealth, while the communities around them absorbed the costs, saw the principals who were not who they said they were, and the towns that voted to maintain the fiction anyway, saw the fish with 3 eyes, and heard the official reassurances that everything was safe. They recognized it, they had already been shown it. Springfield showed them first, in the funny version, and the real world arrived later, in the version where the laugh track was missing. The show's effect on its audience is not the prediction phenomenon, where Springfield accidentally forecasts specific events. It is something quieter and more total. The show gave its audience a vocabulary for understanding the shape of power that they carried into their adult encounters with actual power. It gave them, in advance, the pattern recognition for the kind of systemic dysfunction that is too gradual and too structural to be legible without a reference point. Springfield was the reference point. Homer and Burns and the 3-eyed fish and the principal who wasn't who he said he was, they were all practice. They were the version where you could laugh because the stakes were fictional and the town was yellow and nobody aged and the loop always resolved. The real world does not resolve. The loop in the real world does not complete itself neatly at the end of 22 minutes. But the pattern is the same. And the people who grew up in Springfield, the audience Springfield, who lived there between 7 and 9 o'clock on Sunday evenings for 3.5 decades, they know the pattern. They can see it. They have been seeing it since they were old enough to understand what Homer's job actually means, which is to say, since they were old enough to understand that the person standing between the community and catastrophe is not always the right person for the job. This is the show's real prediction, not Trump, not the smartwatch, not the Disney merger. The show predicted that its audience would grow up into a world that looked like Springfield and would need to know how to live in it. And it spent 36 years preparing them. The mystery of what The Simpsons did to us is not a mystery the show can solve, because the show is inside the thing it would need to be outside of in order to see it clearly. It is the water. We are the fish. And we have never quite been able to count our own eyes. Number section 19. The night shift at Moe's. After midnight in Springfield, the town is quiet in the specific way that television towns are quiet, which is to say not entirely quiet. There is always something. A distant siren, the ambient hum of the power plant's cooling towers, the occasional sound of something going wrong in a neighborhood that has a high statistical frequency of things going wrong. And on certain nights, on the nights when the episode does not need anyone to be anywhere in particular, Homer Simpson sits at the bar at Moe's Tavern, and Moe sits across from him, and nobody says very much, and the beer is cold, and the hour is late, and for a few minutes the show stops being about anything in particular, and just is. These are the scenes that stay with people, not the celebrity appearances, not the elaborate set pieces, not the moments of dramatic revelation, the quiet scenes, Homer on a bar stool, Moe behind the bar, the specific texture of a man finding a few minutes of peace in an improbable location, talking to a friend who is also improbable, in a town that is definitely poisoning him, at an hour when he should probably be home. The friendship between Homer and Moe is one of the show's most durable and least examined relationships. It is not a friendship between equals, not in the conventional sense. Homer is the customer and Moe is the proprietor, and the financial dynamic of that relationship runs in one direction. Homer is, in the world outside the bar, the more socially embedded of the two. He has the family and the job, and the place in Springfield's community that Moe, despite his central location in the town's social geography, does not quite have. But inside the bar, after hours, when the other regulars have gone home and the pretenses that structure Springfield's social life are less relevant, something else operates. Mo sees Homer. Not Homer the plant worker, not Homer the husband and father, not Homer the man who is too dumb for the job he has been assigned by accident and deal. Mo sees Homer the person, the specific and somewhat broken and genuinely lovable person who somehow manages to want the best for everyone around him while being catastrophically bad at helping anyone get it. And Homer sees Mo, sees the loneliness that the bar's institutional centrality in Springfield's social life doesn't cure, sees the man who knows everything about everyone and has chosen, again and again, not to use that knowledge in ways that would benefit him, because the choice not to exploit is the one form of integrity that Mo Sizlak has protected across decades of compromised circumstances. Mo's dark past is the show's longest-running unsolved character mystery. The show has hinted at it across many seasons. He knew people he should not have known. He did things he does not discuss. He carries something from before the bar that the bar was, in some sense, chosen to manage and contain. What it is exactly, the show has never committed to stating, and the ambiguity is doing important work. It keeps Mo in the category of someone with genuine moral weight, someone whose present choices have the texture of consequence rather than just personality, someone who is not who he is by accident. The bar at 2 in the morning is where all of this is visible, where the performance that everyone maintains during Springfield's operational hours is at its lowest, where the specific selves that the day requires have been put down for a few hours, where Homer and Mo can sit across from each other in the quiet and just be the people they actually are. This is the version of Springfield that the theories are always orbiting. The show inside the show. The human thing at the center of the elaborate structure of contamination and denial and looping time and institutional failure and immortal billionaires. 2 men at a bar after midnight. The town asleep around them. The beer cold. The loop paused for a moment, in the specific way that the loop pauses when the people inside it stop performing their roles and simply exist in the same space. The radiation is in the water. Homer is probably dreaming. The three-eyed fish is in the river. The records at the DMV contain something nobody wants to read. Principal Skinner is not Principal Skinner. Mr. Burns will need his treatment on Tuesday. Maggie is watching everything. And Homer is at the bar at 2 in the morning talking to his friend, and for a few minutes the town is just the town, and the people in it are just people, and the show is just the show, and the couch at home is waiting, and tomorrow the loop will resume and none of it will have changed. But tonight there is cold beer and a familiar face, and the specific relief of being somewhere that knows you well enough not to need you to perform. That is Springfield. That is the thing underneath all the theories. The human warmth at the center of an impossible town, the cold beer at the end of the complicated day, the friend who has known you long enough to stop being surprised by you. It is not enough to fix what is wrong with Springfield. Nothing is. But it is enough to make the loop worth being inside. And that, in the end, is why we cannot let it go. Not because it is perfect, not because it is resolved, because it is warm. Because the people in it love each other badly and persist anyway, and find their way back to the couch at the end of every episode and start again the next week. Because Springfield, for all its contamination and denial and impossible geometry and ancient billionaires and non-canonical horror, is home. Imperfect, yellow, four-fingered, endlessly resetting home. And home, wherever it is, whatever shape it takes, is the thing we return to after every journey. The attractor, the fixed point. The couch at the end of the couch gag, waiting with the infinite patience of something that was built to receive you and has been doing exactly that for 36 years and counting. The power plant hums in the distance. The fish in the river have 3 eyes, and they are fine about it. Bart has been 10 years old for 36 years, and somehow that is okay. Lisa has her saxophone propped against the bed, and tomorrow she will pick it up again and play something nobody else in Springfield is playing, and it will be real even when nobody is listening. Marge is awake. She is almost always a little bit awake. She is carrying the weight of tomorrow's worry with the patient efficiency of someone who has made peace with being the person who carries it. Homer is on his way home. He is always on his way home. He will get there. He always gets there. And Maggie is watching everything, from the dark of the nursery, with her enormous and impossibly knowing eyes, waiting for the right moment. She has been waiting for 36 years. She can wait a little longer. Springfield is asleep. The loop continues. The couch is ready. Section 20. The children Springfield forgot to educate. Bart Simpson has been in the fourth grade for 36 years. Think about that for a moment. Not as a cartoon convention, not as a floating timeline artifact, but as a fact within the logic of Springfield's reality. The child enrolled in Mrs. Krabappel's class on the day the show began is still in that class. He has been given the same instruction, completed the same assignments, failed the same tests, been sent to the same principal's office, and not advanced a single academic grade level in over 3 decades. The floating timeline explains this in production terms. In Springfield's internal terms, the explanation is more disturbing. Either Springfield Elementary has the worst educational retention statistics in the history of American public education, with a child remaining in 4th grade for 36 consecutive years, or the school has never actually required academic progress as a condition of continued enrollment, or the concept of grade progression in Springfield Elementary is so loosely applied that the distinction between being held back and being promoted has become functionally meaningless. All 3 of these possibilities are bad. All 3 of them say something specific and unflattering about what Springfield Elementary actually is as an educational institution. The show has made this unflattering characterization explicit many times. The teachers are, with a few notable exceptions, not particularly effective. Mrs. Krabappel, who is the most fully realized of the teaching staff, is smart and funny and genuinely perceptive about children in ways that the show acknowledges. She is also burned out to a degree that has produced a specific kind of professional armor, a protective cynicism that allows her to continue doing the job without expecting too much from it. She is not cruel. She is not indifferent in the way that indifference implies a complete lack of engagement. She is a person who has been doing a difficult job in difficult circumstances for too long, who has found a sustainable way to do it that involves managing her investment carefully. The other teachers are varying degrees of less equipped than this. There are the ones who are clearly there because alternative employment was not available. There are the ones who seem to have found positions in the school through connections rather than competence. There are the ones who have their own unresolved issues that they bring to the classroom in ways that Bart and Lisa and the other students absorb and process and are shaped by in ways the show does not always follow up on. Springfield Elementary, as an educational institution, is doing something to the children enrolled in it. That something is not adequately described as education, at least not education in the sense of preparing children for full participation in a complex world. It is more accurately described as containment. The school holds the children for 6 hours a day. It keeps them in a structured environment with designated activities. It produces paperwork that certifies their presence and tracks their nominal progress through a curriculum that is too underfunded and too inadequately staffed to be fully implemented. This is not useless. Containment during the hours when parental supervision is unavailable is itself a social service of a certain kind. But it is not education, and the children enrolled in it know it on some level even when they cannot articulate it. Lisa knows it most explicitly. Lisa has been trying to get an actual education from Springfield Elementary for 36 years and has been receiving something considerably less. She reads beyond the curriculum. She engages with material that the school has not assigned and would not know how to assess. She argues with her teachers and wins arguments and receives no credit for winning them, because the institutional measure of academic success in Springfield Elementary is compliance with the curriculum rather than engagement with ideas. Bart knows it implicitly. Bart's lack of interest in school is not stupidity. The show has, in scattered episodes, demonstrated that Bart has genuine cognitive capacity that the school's approach to his particular profile never activates. He is spatial and kinesthetic and interpersonal in ways that the traditional academic curriculum is poorly designed to develop. He is exactly the kind of learner who would thrive in an educational environment designed with his specific architecture in mind, and who is exactly the kind of learner that Springfield Elementary has no capacity to serve. What the school does instead is designate him as a problem, a behavior issue, a child who requires management rather than instruction. And Bart, being 10 years old and cognitively limited in the way that 10-year-olds are cognitively limited, accepts this designation in the way that children accept institutional categorizations they receive before they have the intellectual distance to critique them. He becomes, to a significant degree, what the school's framing tells him he is: the troublemaker, the underperformer, the kid in the back row. The educational system that Springfield has built, the The system that Armin Tamzarian administers from his office, that the Springfield School Board funds at its perpetually insufficient level, that Mrs. Krabappel implements with her protective cynicism intact, is a system that produces specific outcomes. Those outcomes are not the outcomes that the system's stated goals describe. The stated goals are education, preparation, civic development. The actual outcomes, measured across 36 seasons of evidence, are a population of children who emerge from the system believing they are smarter than Bart and not as smart as Lisa, and destined for the specific range of options that Springfield's limited economy makes available. Which is to say, most of them end up working for Burns. The school is not an educational failure. It is an educational success at a different task than the one it claims to be performing. It successfully prepares Springfield's children for the specific economic and social position that Springfield's power structure needs them to occupy. It calibrates their expectations to the available options. It shapes their sense of what is possible and what is not possible in ways that make them, on graduation, exactly the workforce that the power plant requires. Grateful for stable employment, undemanding of anything beyond the transaction. Too formed by the institution to easily imagine alternatives to it. Burns does not run the school board runs the school, through the mechanism of underfunding and administrative appointment. But the outcomes the school produces are precisely the outcomes that Burns's economy needs. Whether this alignment is conspiratorial or emergent is, ultimately, not the most important question. What matters is that it exists. The school and the power plant are in alignment about what Springfield's children should become. And Springfield's children, 36 years of them, have obligingly become it. Except Lisa. And the show's treatment of Lisa's exception, the fact that her intelligence and her refusal to be formed by the school's agenda are treated as an anomaly rather than a model, is itself an educational statement. The system produces Homer, reliably. The system produces Bart, more or less. Lisa is what happens when someone comes out of the system still asking the questions. The system was designed to stop them asking. And what happens to Lisa is that she is lonely, dismissed, isolated, and perpetually 8 years old in a second-grade classroom where being the smartest person in the room earns you approximately nothing. The school is very good at what it actually does. What it actually does is the problem. Number. Section 21. The 1,000 Small Kindnesses of Marge Simpson. In 36 seasons of catastrophe and comedy and crisis and reset, the most consistent thing in Springfield is Marge Simpson making a decision to stay. This sounds like a simple thing. It is not a simple thing. The show has depicted, many times and with varying degrees of directness, the weight of what staying costs Marge. The dreams she did not pursue. The talents the family's requirements did not leave room for. The specific and ongoing work of holding a complicated family together in a contaminated town with a husband who is magnificent in ways that require enormous patience to appreciate and catastrophic in ways that are immediately and physically obvious. Marge stays. She stays every episode. She stays when Homer's disasters have destroyed the financial security she worked to build. She stays when his impulsiveness has embarrassed her in front of the community. She stays when the job that he should not have kept and cannot adequately perform has again created consequences that she is managing from the kitchen while he is asleep on the couch. She stays because of the love. This is the show's official position, and it is not wrong. There is genuine love between Homer and Marge, documented across 36 seasons with a consistency and specificity that gives it real weight. The show has earned its depiction of this love through the accumulation of small moments. The particular way Homer looks at Marge, the specific tenderness beneath Marge's exasperation, the 1,000 small gestures of a couple who have been together long enough that the gesture is the language and the language is the history. But love is not the whole answer. The show has been careful, in its best moments, not to let love be the whole answer, because love as the whole answer is sentimental in a way that does not honor the full complexity of what Marge is doing. Marge stays because she has chosen to build something and she will not abandon what she has built. Not because she cannot see its flaws. Not because she does not sometimes have a clear and specific vision of what a different life would look like. She stays because the thing she has built, the family, the home, the specific and improbable structure of this particular household at this particular address in this particular impossible town, is worth the cost of staying. Is worth more than the clean exit. The show has shown us Marge's alternatives. It has shown her in contexts where a different choice was available, where the path away from Homer and Springfield was present and possible. And Marge has looked at those alternatives with the specific clarity of a woman who is not staying because she cannot imagine leaving, but is staying because she has examined the leaving and found it insufficient. This is the hardest kind of staying, the staying that comes after you have honestly reckoned with the alternative and decided that this, here, flawed and complicated and persistently more than she bargained for, is still the thing worth choosing. Marge does not perform contentment. The show does not ask her to perform contentment. It asks her, season after season, to practice the much harder thing, which is the kind of love that exists with full knowledge of its object, that sees Homer clearly and loves him specifically, that understands what the family costs and pays it anyway, not out of resignation but out of the consistent, renewed choice to be here, in this house, with these people. The 1,000 small kindnesses of Marge Simpson are the load-bearing elements of Springfield's survival. Not Burns's money, not the power plant's electricity, not Wiggum's law enforcement or Skinner's administration, or Quimby's ribbon cutting. The thing that holds Springfield's most fundamental social unit together across 36 years of catastrophe and reset and contamination and impossible continuity is Marge's daily decision to get up and make breakfast and be present for the people who need her to be present. That decision is not dramatic. It does not make for television the way Homer's disasters make for television. It is quiet, and it is repeated, and it is, in the fullest sense of the word, heroic. The radiation theory says the town is poisoned. The coma theory says Homer is dreaming. The institutional theories say the systems are captured, and the truth is managed, and the accountability is deferred. All of this is true, and all of it is dark. And every morning Marge makes breakfast. Every evening she is there. Every crisis she manages. Every disaster she absorbs and processes and converts into something the family can survive. She is the specific kind of strength that the world consistently fails to recognize as strength because it is expressed through continuity rather than interruption, through staying rather than leaving, through the daily practice of love as a verb rather than love as a state. Marge Simpson is the show's answer to everything the theories reveal about Springfield. Not a solution, not a fix, not a way out of the contamination or the loop or the accumulated institutional failure. Just the human insistence on continuing to love the specific people you have chosen to love, in the specific place where you have chosen to love them, regardless of what that place is doing to you. That insistence is not enough to change Springfield. Nothing is enough to change Springfield. But it is the thing that makes Springfield worth changing, if changing were possible. It is the reason the town has not been simply abandoned by the people who see it most clearly, who know its costs most directly, who bear its weight most consistently. Marge stayed. She keeps staying. She will keep staying. And every morning she makes breakfast, and Homer stumbles into the kitchen, and the family gathers, and the loop continues, and Springfield, for one more day, is still there. Number section. 22. The light through the cracked cooling tower. It is very late now. You have been in Springfield for a long time. You have walked its streets and sat in its institutions and followed its theories down their various corridors. You have spent time with the people who live here, not as characters in an episode, but as the accumulated presences that 36 seasons of attention have made real as fictional things ever get, which is a kind of real that is not nothing. Springfield is still here. It has always been here. It will presumably keep being here, because we have not found it in ourselves to let it end, and because the people inside it are not done yet with the things they are doing and feeling, and failing to understand about their own situation. The cooling towers are still cracked. The fish in the river still have 3 eyes. The billboard outside the nuclear plant still says safety first, with the second word misspelled in the specific way that has been pointed out many times by many people and corrected by none of them. Homer is still in Sector 7G. Burns is still in his office at the top of his building. Smithers is still managing the schedule. Maggie is still watching everything with her enormous eyes. And through the crack in the cooling tower, a light. Not a metaphor. The cracked cooling tower leaks. It has been leaking since before the show began. Through every episode and every season and every reset. The leak is the constant. The crack through which the contamination flows out into Springfield's world is also, from a certain angle, the crack through which light gets in. The light is not big. It is not enough to see the whole picture. It is the narrow, specific light that comes through any crack in any structure that should be sealed but has not been. The light that says the structure is not as total as it appears. That there is an outside. That the outside exists even when you cannot see very much of it. Lisa sees this light every time she asks a question the town is not interested in answering. Marge sees it every time she makes the choice to stay rather than having the choice made for her. Mo sees it when he chooses not to use what he knows in ways that would hurt the people he knows it about. Apu sees it every time he shows up before anyone else is awake and opens the store and serves whoever comes through the door with the specific seriousness of someone who has decided that the thing he does is worth doing fully, even if the world does not fully notice. The crack is the space where human dignity persists in a system designed to prevent it. It is the space where the loop has not quite sealed itself completely. The space that keeps the contaminated air of Springfield from being entirely its own atmosphere, self-sustaining and isolated from every outside influence. Something gets in through the crack. Something has always gotten in. The real Seymour Skinner got in before the town expelled him. Mona Simpson got back through it for a while before Burns spotted her and called the authorities. The celebrities Homer's dreaming brain receives as fragments of sound through the fog of unconsciousness get in through the crack and become the visitors that Springfield is always so strange about, so simultaneously delighted and dismissive. The light through the cracked cooling tower is the show's final argument, the one underneath all the theories and all the evidence and all the 36 years of accumulated detail. It is the argument that the impossible town and the contaminated water and the billionaire who cannot die and the principal who is not who he says he is, and the floating timeline and the couch that is always there, none of it is sealed, none of it is total. The crack is there. It has always been there. Through the crack you can see that there is an outside. That Springfield, for all its gravitational pull, for all the ways it holds the people inside it, is not the whole world. That the people who live there carry inside them something that the town has not fully touched, something that connects them to possibilities beyond the loop, something that insists, even through the radiation and the fog and the managed amnesia, that this is not all there is. Homer reaches for that something every time he does something unexpectedly generous, every time the fog of his cognitive limitations parts for a moment and the person underneath them, the person who chose stupidity over clarity, because clarity was unbearable, does something that reflects the intelligence and the love that the crayon was put back to contain. Bart reaches for it every time he protects someone smaller than himself, every time the anarchy he performs is revealed to have a moral structure underneath it, every time he is surprised by his own capacity for loyalty. Lisa reaches for it every time she picks up the saxophone and plays something true, even when there is no audience, even when the music will not change anything, even when the principled action will be ignored by the community it is trying to serve. Marge reaches for it every time she stays, in the specific and chosen way she stays, which is the most active and courageous form of presence the show has ever depicted. Maggie reaches for it every time she does something that should not be possible for a 1-year-old, every time the intelligence she has been protecting behind the pacifier surfaces in a gesture or a look that tells you she is not asleep, has never been asleep, has been watching and waiting and preparing for something that the show has not yet revealed. Through the crack. The light. The possibility that Springfield is not sealed. That the loop can be observed from outside even when it cannot be exited. That the theories, for all their darkness, are themselves a form of that light. The specific illumination that comes from someone refusing to stop looking, refusing to accept the surface, refusing to agree that the three-eyed fish is fine. The show is still running, we are still watching, the loop is still turning, and somewhere in Springfield, at the back of the cooling tower, in the crack that was never repaired because repairing it would mean admitting it existed, the light keeps coming in. It is a small light, it is not enough to see everything by, but it is there, and it is real, and it has been there since the beginning, and it will be there tomorrow, and it will be there in the next episode and the one after that. The light is what we are looking for when we look at Springfield, the thing that persists despite everything, the thing that the contamination has not reached, and the loop has not sealed, and the billionaire has not managed to buy, and the light through the crack will still be there, patient and thin and real, the way all the most important lights are. Springfield keeps watch. It always does. Number, Section 23, the Springfield Gazette and the news nobody prints. There is a newspaper in Springfield. The Springfield Gazette. It has existed for the duration of the show's run, showing up in background props and specific plot episodes, staffed by characters who range from the modestly competent to the enthusiastically corrupt, producing content that reflects Springfield's specific relationship to the journalism that is supposed to hold its institutions accountable. In theory, a local newspaper is one of the most important mechanisms of institutional accountability in a community. It is the independent observer, the institution whose specific function is to notice things that other institutions would prefer went unnoticed, to document them, to publish them in a form accessible to the community, and to create the conditions for the community to respond. The free press, in its most idealized form, is the infrastructure that makes democratic accountability possible. In Springfield, the Gazette functions as a somewhat different thing. It publishes what Springfield's power structure wants published. It covers the stories that are available to it. It employs journalists who are subject to the same environmental conditions, the same institutional pressures, the same accumulated cognitive effects of living in a contaminated community as every other resident of the town, and it has, across 36 years of Springfield's extraordinary history of suppressible events, managed to cover an impressive amount of the town's dysfunction, while somehow never quite producing the comprehensive investigative piece that would bring everything together. Kent Brockman is the face of Springfield's news media. He is the local news anchor, the man who delivers Springfield's daily reality to its residents in the specific packaging of the televised news broadcast, with the authoritative cadence and the professionally maintained coif and the specific relationship to the material he is covering that television journalism has always had, which is to say a relationship that prioritizes presentation over investigation, that values the story that fits the format over the story that requires more time than the format allows. Kent Brockman is not incompetent in the simple sense. He is not Nick Riviera with a microphone. He is a professional with genuine skills who has developed, through years of operation within Springfield's specific institutional environment, a calibrated sense of what stories get coverage and what stories get managed away. He has learned, as journalists in captured information environments always learn, the difference between the stories he is supposed to pursue and the stories that would create problems he is not equipped to absorb. There are moments in the show where Brockman's calibration slips, where the story is so obvious and so large that even the institutional pressure cannot prevent him from covering it in a way that reflects its actual significance. The dome, the three-eyed fish, Burns's various public catastrophes. These get coverage. They get the full television news treatment, the live shots outside the relevant building, the expert commentary from someone who may or may not be an actual expert, the anchor's carefully maintained expression of serious concern. And then the next broadcast, Springfield has moved on. The story that seemed world-altering in Monday's news cycle is absent from Tuesday's. Not because it was resolved, not because the underlying issue was addressed, because the broadcast moved on, because the format requires movement, because a story that stays in the news cycle creates the expectation of follow-up, and follow-up creates the expectation of consequences. And consequences are the thing that Springfield's institutional structure is most comprehensively designed to prevent. The Gazette operates in the same way, but more slowly, and with the additional complication of print, which creates a record. Television news in Springfield is ephemeral. Print news is archived. The Gazette's archives, somewhere in a filing room that no episode has ever explored in any detail, contain the complete documentary history of Springfield's extraordinary sequence of suppressible events. Who has access to those archives? What would a researcher find, going through 36 years of Springfield Gazette back issues with the intention of assembling a comprehensive timeline of what happened in this town, and in what order, and at whose hands? What would the accumulated record reveal that no single episode's news coverage makes visible? The answer, if someone were to sit down with those archives and read them in full, is approximately what we have been assembling across this long night in Springfield. The power plant's violations, documented over time, the three-eyed fish, and every subsequent non-investigation of what it implied, the dome, the various Burns scandals, the series of events that the town has collectively agreed to remember selectively and forget strategically. The archive is the record of the forgetting. It documents what was known at each moment, and what was allowed to persist as knowledge, and what was allowed to fade. And in the gap between what was documented and what produced action, in the space between the Gazette's coverage and Springfield's collective response to that coverage, The full architecture of the town's denial mechanism becomes visible. The newspaper is the town's mirror. And the town, for 36 years, has been glancing at its reflection and then looking away, because the reflection shows something that would require a response if acknowledged. And acknowledgement has always been more expensive than the alternative. Kent Brockman delivers the news. Springfield watches. Springfield does not, as a rule, act on the news in ways that disrupt the fundamental arrangements that produce the news. The news and the arrangements exist in a stable equilibrium that has held for 36 years. The news documents the arrangements. The arrangements survive the documentation. Springfield keeps going. And the archive keeps growing, one more issue at a time, in a filing room somewhere that has never been adequately explored, holding the complete record of everything Springfield decided not to fully reckon with. The archive is the town's conscience. The town has chosen, collectively and repeatedly, not to read it. This is not comfortable, but it is consistent. And Springfield, above all else, is consistent. Number section 24. What the treehouse knows that the show won't say. Every October, something changes in Springfield. The calendar turns to the month with the shortened days and the cooling air, and the decorations in the windows, and the town that is normally committed to maintaining its impossible normality allows itself, for one episode, to be honest about what it actually is. The Treehouse of Horror episodes are the show's annual confession. They are the moment when the production of The Simpsons steps outside its own conventions and says, directly and without the mediating layer of comedy that makes the rest of the year palatable, what it has been trying to say all along. We said earlier that the Treehouse episodes are the show thinking about itself. They are also the show thinking about us, about the people watching, about what we see when we look at Springfield and what we are choosing not to see. The horror of the Treehouse is always the horror of the familiar made strange. It is always the Simpsons house, the Simpsons family, the Simpsons town, taken one step further in the direction that the regular episodes have been pointing all along, and then taken that one step explicitly rather than implicitly. The show that has been a horror story dressed as a sitcom removes the dress, and what is revealed when the dress comes off is not a stranger. It is the same family, the same house, the same yellow faces and four-fingered hands, the same Springfield skyline with the same cooling towers. The horror is not something alien to Springfield. The horror is Springfield, allowed to be itself completely. Burns as a vampire does not require you to believe in vampires. It requires you to believe that someone can keep themselves alive beyond the normal biological term through the exploitation of a community's vital resources, and that this exploitation can be managed so smoothly and so institutionally that the people being exploited do not notice they are being drained. The vampire metaphor is not a fantastical addition to the Burns character. It is the Burns character made literal. The family dying in various elaborate ways in the Treehouse episodes is not a departure from the show's normal emotional stakes. It is the normal emotional stakes allowed to become explicit. The fear that underlies every episode of the regular Simpsons, the fear that the family could be lost, that the loop could stop, that the people you love could be taken from the place where you need them to be. This fear is the Treehouse's raw material. The Treehouse does not introduce mortality to Springfield. It lets mortality have its full shape rather than the comedically managed shape the regular episodes give it. And the Treehouse knows things that the regular show will not say. It knows that the power plant is a monster, that Burns is a monster of a specific and recognizable kind, that the school and the hospital and the police force and the mayor's office and the Gazette and all the other institutions of Springfield have, over the course of their operation, accumulated a horror that is not supernatural in origin but that has become, through sustained exposure, something that the normal categories of comedy can no longer contain. The Treehouse says this directly, once a year, in October, in the dark, with everyone watching. And then November comes, and the regular show resumes, and Springfield returns to its managed reality, and the horror goes back into the subtext, and the cooling towers go back to leaking quietly, and Homer goes back to falling asleep at his workstation, and the fish in the river go back to having three eyes that nobody is doing anything about. But the Treehouse said it. It says it every year. It has been saying it since the show had the courage to give itself a night off from its own conventions and let the thing that is actually there come to the surface. The Treehouse is not the exception to the show. The Treehouse is the show's most honest episode every year, delivered in the costume of horror because horror is the only genre that can hold the full weight of what Springfield is. Everything else is the management of that weight. The jokes are the management. The resets are the management. The floating timeline and the collective denial and the three-eyed fish that becomes a punchline rather than a crisis, all of it is the management. October is when the management stops. October is when Springfield is allowed to be true. And the truth of Springfield is what you find when you strip away the management. When you follow the contamination to its source and the loop to its structure and the institutional capture to its architect, and what you find at the center of all of it is the family. Still there, still together, still trying, badly and imperfectly and with more love than strategy, to make it through. Even in the treehouse, even in the horror, even when they are ghosts or vampires or aliens or the last survivors of an apocalyptic scenario that the show engineered specifically to see what would happen if the normal constraints were lifted, they are always still the family. That is the treehouse's final truth. The horror does not unmake them. The horror reveals them. Stripped of the management and the comedy and the reset button, the Simpson family is still the Simpson family, still fumbling toward each other, still choosing each other over the alternatives, still finding their way back to the couch at the end of the episode. The horror does not win. The family does not win either exactly in the way that competitions have winners. But they endure. They persist. They make it to the end credits, sometimes alive and sometimes something else, but always still themselves, still the impossible and specific and unmanageable family at the center of the impossible and specific and unmanageable town. The treehouse knows this. The regular show knows this. We know this. We have always known this. The horror is real. The love is realer. And in October, in Springfield, with the decorations in the windows and the short days and the cooling air, both of those things get to be true at the same time, without the mediation of a joke that makes one more comfortable than the other. October is Springfield's most honest month. The Treehouse is Springfield's most honest episode. And we watch every year. We have always watched. We will keep watching. Because even the horror is better than not being in Springfield at all. Number section 25. The long goodbye Springfield never says. The Simpsons has been saying goodbye for years, without ever quite finishing the sentence. Every finale, every season ender, every episode that positions itself as potentially conclusive has pulled back from the edge at the last moment, has found a way to leave the door open, has refused in the end to be the one that closes out the story. The show has been rehearsing its own ending for decades without being able to commit to it in the specific way that things you love are very hard to end, because ending them requires acknowledging that the thing you loved is over. This is not a creative failure. It is not cowardice. It is the honest expression of a truth that everyone who makes this show and everyone who watches it already knows, which is that ending The Simpsons would be an act of enormous cultural consequence, the kind of ending that changes the shape of the cultural landscape it leaves behind. And the people responsible for it are not sure they are prepared to be the ones who did that. Who said here, this is where it stops? The Goodbye Springfield never says is a goodbye to a very specific version of the American family. The version that is always recoverable, always resettable, always capable of absorbing the worst that a week can produce and returning to baseline by Sunday night. The version that does not age out of its particular roles. The version that lives in the permanent present tense, insulated from the linear direction that time actually moves in. That version of the family is a comfort that the culture has been unwilling to give up. Not because it is realistic, not because any actual family works this way, but because the fantasy of the family that always resets, that always recovers, that always finds its way back to the couch together is a fantasy that does important emotional work for the people who hold it. It says that the family cannot be broken permanently, that the damage is always repairable, that the love persists through every disaster, that the people you started with are still the people you have, regardless of how much time has passed and how much has gone wrong. This is not true in the world. Families break, they lose members, they drift apart, they change beyond recognition. The people you started with become different people, and you become a different person, and the specific configuration of love and trouble and familiarity that you call a family is not a fixed point, but a moving one. Springfield holds that moving point still. It says this family, this configuration, this specific household at this specific address is permanent. The couch is permanent, the dinner table is permanent, The peculiar and irreplaceable chemistry of Homer and Marge and Bart and Lisa and Maggie is permanent. And the audience has accepted this, has chosen to accept it, has kept watching, season after season, accepting the floating timeline and the artistic decline and the cognitive dissonance of beloved characters doing things that contradict who they have always been, because the alternative to accepting all of this is the goodbye. And the goodbye means acknowledging that permanent was never the right word, that the family, like all families, was always temporary, always in the process of becoming something different. The Simpsons has been running long enough that the people who grew up with it have grown up, have become parents themselves, have watched their own families change in the ways that real families change, have lost people, have gained people, have watched the configuration they started with transform into something they did not predict and could not have prepared for. And they still watch The Simpsons, still watch Bart at 10 and Lisa at 8, and Homer still 36 and Marge still patient, still the same family in the same house at the same address. Because as long as the show is running, something is permanent, something does not change. Something is recoverable and resettable, and always there when you turn it on. The familiar music and the familiar faces and the familiar house at the end of the familiar street. The Goodbye Springfield never says is the goodbye to the version of America where things are always fixable, where the disasters always resolve, where the family is the unit that holds and keeps holding, where you can come back to the couch at the end of every week and find everything more or less as it was. The show knows this goodbye is coming. Every episode that could be a finale without quite being one is the show practicing the sentence it has not yet been able to complete. Every season that ends with the family intact and the loop continuing is the show choosing, one more time, to extend the sentence rather than finish it. There will be a last episode of The Simpsons. There will be a day when the show that has been running since the 17th of December, 1989, produces an episode that is followed by no new episode. The loop will complete. The cooling towers will be silent. The couch gag will play for the last time. Homer will come home and sit down and the credits will roll and there will be nothing after the credits. On that day, the goodbye will be complete. The family will be set free from the loop. Bart will be allowed to turn 11. Lisa will be allowed to turn 9. Maggie will be allowed to say her second word. Time will begin again in Springfield. The floating timeline will land. And everything the show has been deferring will arrive. We are not ready for that day. We have never been ready. We will not be ready when it comes, but the show has been preparing us for it, gently and continuously, through 36 years of evidence that the loop cannot hold forever, that the contamination is real, that the coma will end, that the fiction will eventually collide with the truth it has been managing, that the crack in the cooling tower will widen. The goodbye is coming. We know it is coming. We have always known it is coming. And until it arrives, we watch. We keep watching. We go to Springfield every time it opens its doors to us, and we sit on the metaphorical couch next to the metaphorical family, and we let the loop run for one more episode, one more week, one more year. Because as long as Springfield is there, as long as the loop is running, as long as Homer is on his way home from Moe's and the beer is cold and the family is intact and the couch is waiting, something we love very much is still alive. And the goodbye, the real goodbye, the one that acknowledges all of this and ends the sentence properly, can wait. It can always wait one more week. Number closing thoughts. Springfield as a state of mind. You are still here. Or perhaps you drifted off somewhere in section 14 and this is the murmur of a voice you are no longer fully tracking, which is fine. That is precisely what this was built for. Springfield is a state of mind more than a place. It lives in the specific neural pathways that were formed in front of a television, in the living rooms of houses that are now remembered differently than they actually were, in the childhood Sundays that have the specific and irreproducible texture of things that happened before you understood they were happening. The mysteries we have explored tonight, the Springfield hospitals studied in curiosity, the donut-shaped universe that Homer intuited before the cosmologists confirmed it, Sideshow Bob's impossibility of escape, Lisa's frozen age and her already made choice, the institutional knowledge of Patty and Selma, the invisible town of Shelbyville that would resolve too much if it were visible, the couch gag cosmology, Krusty's performed self, Maud's ghost, Springfield's underground economy, the treehouse's annual honesty, the mathematics of the impossible timeline, Principal Skinner's fabricated authority, Apu's doctorate behind the counter, the background characters who remember everything, What Burns actually wants, the education Springfield did not provide, the thousand small kindnesses that hold the town together, the light through the cracked cooling tower, the newspaper that documents, what the town will not address, the October truth, the goodbye that has not yet been said, none of these mysteries are resolved. Springfield does not resolve its mysteries. That is one of the things that makes it Springfield. But sitting with them, following them through the long and patient dark of a night in Springfield, produces something that resolution would not produce. It produces understanding, not of the answers but of the questions themselves, why they matter, what they reveal about the show and about the audience, and about the specific moment in the culture that produced both. The Simpsons ask certain questions about America at the end of the 20th century and the beginning of the 21st. It asked them through a cartoon family in a contaminated town, through comedy and horror and the accumulated detail of 36 years of creative attention. And the questions it asked, about power and accountability and environmental responsibility and educational failure, and the specific mechanisms of institutional denial, these questions did not become less relevant as the show aged. They became more relevant. The world became more Springfield, as we have noted, and Springfield's questions became the questions the world was also asking, in less yellow and four-fingered terms. The show did not predict the future. The show described the present, its own present, and every subsequent present, with enough precision that the description kept fitting new moments as they arrived. It was not prophecy, it was diagnosis. And the diagnosis has held up, episode after episode, season after season, across every administration and every cultural shift and every technological transformation that has happened, while the Springfield cooling towers stood and the fish in the river grew their third eye, and the Simpsons family stayed exactly as they were on the 17th of December 1989. The theories will still be there in the morning. Springfield will still be there in the morning. The family will be on the couch when you come back, ready to begin the next episode, the next loop, the next trip through the specific and impossible and beloved geography of the only town that could have produced all of these questions and still managed, every Sunday night, to make you laugh. Springfield keeps watch. Good night.